from the brain. Move the head 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 from the brain.
Hello everyone. Hello. Most of you already know me anyway, but my name's Stuart Harper. I work for Normal UK, and we spoke to the SSDP a few weeks ago, and we decided that we'd try to get Marc to come over and speak to everybody. So this is the last leg of Marc's tour. He started off in Glasgow, he's gone through and done Manchester, and now today, after 3 days of hectic speaking, he's here to do London. We're sure there's a few people that are still running around. We've got messages coming in. It's a bit hard to find the buildings, I'm sure you can probably all agree. So there'll be people coming in drips and drabs, so hopefully it won't interrupt anyone, but if it does, apologies in advance. So a little bit about Normal UK for those of you that don't know. Normal UK is the UK branch of the Normal organisation, which is a worldwide organisation for the normalisation and legalisation of cannabis. And the guys that have helped to arrange to put this on here for you are all volunteers. They all work for free, giving of their time so that we can do interesting things like this. So I'm not going to bore you. Greg's going to stand up and do a little bit of a talk about...
Greg's going to do that instead.
Yeah, Greg's going to do that. So Greg's going to give a quick talk about the UK CFCs and more particular about London, what we're going to be doing over the next quarter. And then without further ado, we'll get on to the main acts and put Jodie and Marc on the spot. So unless there was any questions,
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for coming down. I am the chair of the UK CSC,
but I won't be speaking.
Cannabis Social Clubs. I'm sure most of you are aware that over the last 10 years, 15 years in Europe, there's been a movement to establish cannabis social clubs. So the basically private member clubs, a small group of people they would start off with, and they would grow between themselves, share the cannabis out at cost price. There wouldn't be a profit involved, and everyone would have access to good quality, cheap cannabis of like strains that they would like. They weren't having to engage with the black market and hand over money to criminal organisations, and they had the right to do this under privacy laws. We don't quite have as good a situation as they do, where they now have 400 clubs in Barcelona alone, about 700 in the country. Which are effectively protected under the Spanish constitution under privacy laws. Because they have these privacy laws under the constitution, they can smoke on their own private property.
It's under the EU constitution even. It's just ignored in this country.
Yeah, all relevant EU member states retain control of their own internal drug policy, so although technically it does, until any of them give you the same protections as the Spanish do for private consumption, it wouldn't work anywhere else, although in theory
yeah.
the Constitution does cover it.
So with the idea of safety in numbers and all being owners in these clubs that they join, they become that space becomes their private property, so they can buy the cannabis and consume it on site, or they shouldn't technically be caught with it taking it home, but they can consume it on their own property as well. If a policeman was to open the door, they wouldn't actually have a problem if they had opened the door smoking a joint. Like I say, we don't have it quite that good over here in the UK, but there are options that we think are viable for us to be able to move into that direction, because cannabis social clubs is a very good option for us to do. I just spent a week in Barcelona with a few of the guys here, went out with the Brighton Cannabis Club, and it was a very pleasant experience. But I've been to Amsterdam a few times, I'm sure plenty of you have. You go in there, you've got quite a big menu, you can look at the buds, the quality is going to be, unless it's a coffee shop that really takes pride in what it offers its customers, you can get quite a lot of run-of-the-mill stuff for quite a price. Sometimes you get a better deal, like on the street over here, £10 a gram. Over there you're paying sort of €18 a gram. Hit and miss as well. Like you don't know if it's flushed. There's no real system to for the controlled regulation supply to the coffee shops out there. Still very much black market, and they call it the backdoor problem, because how do they solve how you fill the coffee shops with weed? over in Spain, because they have these members, they can grow a certain amount of plants per member in a collective grow, and then separate from, stop the cannabis social clubs from there. We think we'd be able to do the same kind of thing over here. People are already growing, people are buying cannabis, people are selling cannabis. Let's just take it a little bit step further. If you want, you and your friends want access to good quality cannabis at an affordable price, what you want to be able to smoke, you don't have to engage in antisocial behaviour. Form a collective or a cannabis social club. One of you grows, or you have one of your team members, club members that grows, and you have one of you that distributes it. You can provide to your members, a very good cost and provide a decent experience for them. In Spain, they range from sort of like 150 members up to sort of like 9,000. Some of them have. Obviously, we think that would be quite a large criminal organisation over here. So, what we're suggesting is you keep your numbers down. Or what we've been told to suggest, what we've been suggested is that we keep our numbers down. Like we've been speaking quite closely to Release, the drugs law charity, about this. They work with on the sentencing guideline councils. They interact with government think tanks and policy groups and makers when policy makers are looking at changing the laws and looking at sentencing guidelines. So they have an input. Because we've worked closely with them, we feel like if we get these collectives together, when the next time they come up to the sentencing guidelines, we'll have enough information to actually try and change the law in a positive way, because that's never happened before. Like, the cannabis consumers have never had like a real collective voice in this country, and we know we complain about a lot of the sort of like ill advice and bad things that the government say about cannabis, but they're never really challenged in a way that has any weight behind it. And I think this is uniting people, getting them to raise their voices together. It's going to have much more of a positive impact, and that's the feedback we've had from sort of like Transform and Release, who do work in these kind of environments. When I say working on smaller clubs, we're looking for people to start things in their local areas. Looking at it on a national scale, there's quite a lot going on, but for real change to actually take root in this country, we do need certain groups in certain areas to actually step up and make a noise and make things happen. In Brighton, I'm proud to be part of the team. We've started at the beginning of the year. We've had some local meetings. We put the word out in the community, just done a few little promotional events, like some barbecues across the summer. We did a Green Pride picnic, just invited everyone, bring your own food, bring your own bud, smoke up out in the park. It was a very open event, and it made a lot of local awareness. We got in papers, and people that we hadn't previously interacted with came forward and said that that we're interested in doing the same thing. How do we become a member? I'm just walking around town now, like if I hand out flyers or stickers, people instantly, they already know what's going on with the club. They want to be part of it. They ask when the next event is. So it's quite easy to put the word out and make things happen. Now, London obviously is a huge area, and we've got quite a lot of tokers in it. We think it's time that there are private member clubs already active in London, all across the UK. In fact, there's only a small amount of them, but they are operational. And it just shows you that it can work. For London, what we want to do is we want to sort of like, we've had a great following. We got 10,000 people at Hyde Park last year. We had about 6,000 people this year. We want to start splitting it into regions. So if you're, part of the movement already, and you want to take it a little step further, and you're in London, you think you can reach out to your local community, please get in contact with us and find out how you can, how you can get involved more. What we're doing is we're trying to get together a little forum of the London sort of like representatives, as they will be, and form a strategy there. But there's definitely quite a lot of support in London. Does anyone have any questions about the Cannabis social clubs?
How small are groups involved?
3 people can start. That's all you need is sort of like someone to chair meetings, someone to sort of like be a secretary and a treasurer. Okay, you won't have too much to
Yeah,
do
I'm just thinking
if
of
you
that, no,
just
saying
admin and
you have
stuff.
small groups.
Yeah.
But you know, what kind of limits on like
Well, a club would be a
members?
registered entity, actually registered with the government as a non-profit organisation. So it's an entity that can't be shut down because it doesn't actually sell or trade cannabis itself. That's done at a collective level. There's a kind of detachment between the two. The idea would be that the minimum amount of people for a club would be 3 individuals. The maximum amount of individuals in the club would be 150. There's no reason why different clubs can't pull together to buy resources or to rent venues and things of that kind of nature. But the reason we've kind of kept the limit at that high is simply because if you look at the reaction of what's happened in Spain, originally in their provisos the clubs were meant to be 100 member limit clubs. A lot of them now growing to the thousands and they're facing a very harsh backlash from local and national government. So the advice that we've been given by the different organisations that we're engaged with is to make sure that the numbers in the clubs aren't seen as threatening to the local authorities. They're easily manageable. People that run them can easily vouch for every individual that's in them, because security is obviously a concern as well. Once you start dealing with 1,000 people, no one can remember 1,000 names and faces and know 1,000 people in an organisation. It becomes too unwieldy. Maybe in the future, once legislation changes and actually allows these sorts of things, it will be possible to have larger club sizes. But before then, it's important to keep them low. Like primarily in London, what we want to do by the end of the year is to have a club in every borough. So that would be the first step. And then we do exactly the same as what we've done in the South East and the South West regions of the UK, which is once you've got a club in every borough, you then get that club to act as a focus to then set up other clubs within that borough and that region. So eventually you end up maybe with the clubs, some of the denser populated areas of London, 3 or 4 within a few streets of each other. But likewise, the more you move to the outskirts, they're going to be more dispersed, I'd imagine. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, I think we'll shut up now and let Jodie get on with speaking.
How much time have we got? I need to forget.
How much would you like, Jodie?
Oh, I
How
don't
much would
know,
you like?
7:50.
Well, if you want to keep going for...
I'll do like a
yeah,
10, 20,
you
10.
can go along for that as well.
5.
Yeah,
Whatever
fine.
you want.
Yeah, whatever you want. I mean, about 35, 40 minutes, and then we can get Mark,
Alright,
have a quick
so
5-minute break.
I'm sure he has a lot
really
to
hot
say.
down here, and then get on with
Excellent.
Mark.
All right, well, thank you all for coming here, and thank you to Normal UK and Students for Sensible Drug Policy for bringing us. Hard to believe we're going to be either on a plane tomorrow or home tomorrow at this time. It's been 3 weeks on the road. He's been out of prison only about 6 weeks, I think, so you guys have got us before most people at home. They're all waiting for him to return. It's been an incredible tour because, as we just heard about Spain, I didn't know about Spain. I didn't know they had 200 clubs where they were selling cannabis or providing cannabis to the members of the collective. I didn't realize how much was going on, and even as we met activists, we would ask if they knew another activist we had heard from, and they said no, because there are 200 clubs and obviously thousands of enthusiasts, so not everybody knows everybody. But that's great, because it means it's enormous. And I didn't know what to expect when we flew over to Ireland. I thought they might all be hiding away in closets and smoking out of apples or pop cans. I don't know. I had no idea. I didn't know what was going on, how bad it might have been. So when we showed up there, and I'll tell you, there's some very good green stuff in Ireland. It's incredible. They're growing a lot of their own. And that's a big backlash, I think, to years of the UK and Europe and generally just suffering from a lack of bud and a lot of gritweed and soap bar hash and different adulterated or just very subpar stuff. And people started growing their own because it would be easier to do so. And they started getting seeds a lot from places like Marc, who sold seeds to people all over the world. But I should just talk briefly about my own history and how when I was in high school I hated marijuana and I wanted it to be illegal, and I was a prohibitionist, authoritarian, teacher's pet, anti-drug, drinking, sex, anything fun I was against, and I was like really into that authoritarian thing. And I believed what my teachers told me about pot and all that. And then my best friend started smoking pot and reading Cannabis Culture magazine and watching pot TV creations of Marc Emery. And 9/11 happened, and war was announced, and the war on terror, and oil wars in Afghanistan, and all these terms and ideas are being thrown around, and I'm in grade 10 and learning about all of this, and it's incredible because when my friends are smoking pot and I was telling them how stupid they were and they were making themselves idiots and they may as well just kill themselves now because it's poison what they're consuming, I said that stuff, but I realized that they were a lot smarter than everybody else in school. And when all these big issues about war and oil and governments and money and all this, it was all being talked about. And I said, you guys are actually really smart. But pot smokers are supposed to be stupid. And so that kind of threw me for a loop. And then I started questioning other things. And that, of course, led me to turning into not so much the star student anymore. It was like, oh no, what's happened to Jodie? She doesn't listen to us anymore. She's not teacher's pet. And it was simply because I started questioning everything. Because I'd been lied to. And not only had I been lied to, I had been turned into a liar myself, lying to my friends and condemning them for what really I discovered was a peaceful, harmless activity. And that led me into learning more about marijuana prohibition and drug prohibition and the drug war. And it took me a while to actually even come to those sort of ideas, because when I first moved to Vancouver in 10 years ago, in 2004, I was all for pot, but I was against other drugs. I said, throw up the meth users, throw them in jail, the meth users and the heroin dealers, get rid of them all. But the pot people, they're cool. You should let them be okay. But then I started moving to that other realm where I see there are two different areas where you might find yourself if you're in drug policy reform. You might be a pro-marijuana centric person, and we all know people like that. They're very much into the culture. They're very proud of their Rasta colors and their dreads or whatever. They have their pot pride. They talk about hemp and medical marijuana and all the wonderful things that I do believe in. I do believe in so many of these things. But that message was more necessary back in the days, I think, of rallying in the streets, of holding signs, of the Global Marijuana March, which Marc sponsored in many cities around the world. You know, there was a time for the serious enthusiasts to say, stop oppressing us. And that group you could also kind of connect to the 60s and the anti-war movement. And I even remember growing up and seeing, peace signs and hippies and pot, and it was all kind of tied together. If you were against war, you were pro-pot. And we've moved forward with that. I mean, educational reform, a lot of people working hard to share the message of cannabis, that's been essential. But what we've seen in recent years is the emergence of a more anti-prohibition area. And these are the professionals. You have lawyers, doctors, former attorneys general, former prison guards, former presidents and prime ministers, all of the authoritarians who are out there now saying, I don't like pot. I don't want to smoke it. I don't want you to smoke it. But prohibition is a failed policy. Prohibition costs us billions of tax dollars and enriches organized crime with billions of tax dollars. And while we spend our tax dollars on prohibition, we're depriving schools and healthcare and the basics of society. We're depriving them of tax dollars. So there's these people who started saying, well, let's look at harm reduction and prison reform and tax spending. And those people aren't pro-pot. And we don't need them to be pro-pot because there's an overlap in the middle where we need the straight-laced, regular Joes and the people in positions of power to take our position and to agree with us. But it required the earlier work of the advocates, of the pot flag waving activists, of which I am one. I love waving my Cannabis Canada pot flag. I love holding signs, and you have to take action in that way. But we're at a point right now, after all these years of Marc's work, and I'll let him explain how he contributed to all the reform in Canada. But we're at a point now, obviously you all know about Washington and Colorado. Well, before that, there was California and their Proposition 19. And Marc had just been extradited to the United States. And there was a lot of excitement in the marijuana movement because marijuana legalization was being put on the ballot for the first time. But we also started seeing the divisions. And it's not so much divisions like we're enemies, although it felt like that a lot of the time. It was divisions in that we were at the point where the message wasn't just legalize pot or end prohibition, it was how. What are the details? I mean, okay, we all agree, let's stop arresting pot people. We all agree, let's stop wasting money. But what model replaces prohibition? And when you start asking that question, that's where you'll find the divisions. But that can be found within any movement, from the women's rights to African Americans' rights to any sort of organization, even animal rights. You've got PETA on one hand and a lot of people who don't like them. And so I don't really condemn that. I think that's great. Marc used to say, if you have more people in different little cells, it's hard for the government to get rid of you because, they go after one group, there's still a lot of others. But if you're all united into one group and that one group fails, that's pretty bad for everyone involved. And that's similar to government. If government is massive and fails, it fails on a massive scale. If it's small and it messes up, it won't be that bad. But with the marijuana movement in 2010 and legalization being offered, there was this division. It was between the people who said, no, we need government to stay out of our lives. They've been oppressing us. How can you trust them? How can you trust government? Why would you give government our plant? It'll destroy everything. And I understand that. I sympathize with that. I don't trust government. Government messes up most everything they do. They spend way too much money and deliver the worst services and then ask you for more taxes to pay for what you're not even getting. So government doesn't really do a great job. But when it comes to any group of people being oppressed, it's the oppressor who has to stop oppressing. So for a lot of people in 2010, when Proposition 19 was on the table, for me and Mark, it was really frustrating because you had a wheelchair-bound activist, Richard Lee of Oaksterdam University, donating for the first time, really, $1 million to put something on the ballot. And besides Mark's money that he sent to ballot initiatives in the U.S. in the earlier years, there wasn't anyone giving money to it. Even George Soros was just kind of the one and only big money guy. There weren't nearly the powerful people invested in it now. So in 2010, we suddenly saw this opportunity of legalization, but you saw the concerns about what legalization means. Does it mean government control? Does it mean you can grow your own? Does it mean you can share with your friends, or will you still get arrested for trafficking? Or can you go to a shop and buy it? And what age do you have to be? And who's going to supply it? And how is that supply going to be controlled? And all these questions come up because take anything at all, this pen went through regulations. That ink had to pass some sort of standard. That packaging had to pass some sort of standard. So everything from this table to the chair to the sign, although I don't know how many regulations it had to go through, but you know, if it had been made on hemp, it'd probably be over-regulated. You know? So government regulates everything, but once we start moving from the end prohibition legalized pot into, well, how? That's where a lot of challenges come up. But what's really important is just to stop worrying about where you differ from others and just continue to promote whatever ideas you have. Because even though California failed, and it failed because of the growers, and they admit it. I was there campaigning. We saw people puffing on the street the night before the vote. We said, go vote yes on Prop 19. They said, hell no, I grow this shit. And we were like, well, so you're telling us that for the next few years, people are going to still be arrested for possession, and you're okay with that? Like, you're going to go tell all those kids that are going to get arrested and lose their scholarships that they need to just wait a while and go to jail while you keep growing? And to me that felt unfair, but I also understand the concerns of the home growers and people who have been investing in that industry. It is their livelihood, it is their life. They do make a profit off that plant. But I don't think we need to worry, like they often did, that once you legalize it, all the money's going to disappear. I really believe that if you legalize it, there should be space for everybody. And that's in my dream model. There's practical, and then there's idealism, and all of us dream of government being less oppressive, of liberty and freedom and peace and happiness. I dream of all that, but I know it's not going to all be gained in one step. So you have to take what you can get and ask for more. Because those Prop 19 people, the people against legalization for adults, I said to them, well, why did you oppose medical marijuana in California? That wasn't perfect. That wasn't pot for everybody. That wasn't the ideal model. There's still a lot of people who didn't get access. Did you object to medical marijuana? No, of course they didn't. They wanted to take what they could get and work for more. And that's why Washington and Colorado legalization, full legalization for adults, could not have happened if you didn't have the decrim and the medical marijuana that happened in so many states beforehand. And no model is perfect, and no model of anything is perfect. No system is perfect. Everything requires people to be engaged and to work and to change it. So when it came to Prop 19 and even Initiative 502 in Washington and Amendment 64 in Colorado, there was a lot of division, but it was just division in what people wanted to see. And I sympathize with the people concerned about monopolies, and I understand the concerns of medical marijuana patients feeling that their dispensaries will shut down and they'll be forced to go to a store instead. I understand all the concerns, but for me the most important priority in any of my actions is to reduce the suffering of as many people as possible. And if that requires just decrim it first, that'll be good enough. Stop arresting people. And if that's just medical marijuana for kids, like some US states are going to pass legislation and have, that's CBD medicine only for children, only for seizures. And that's not good enough, but it's something, and there's no way I'm going to tell those kids to keep suffering while we wait for something better. So when you talk about reform, like, you take what you can get and ask for more. And even though it can be frustrating and worrisome at times, like, I understand why California might be upset. They got medical marijuana 20 years ago, and what have they done since? obviously a lot of genetics and growing and fun parties and stores, but in the meantime with policy reform, it kind of got a little slowed. And it happens when people who are invested suddenly become a little concerned about their own self-interest. And I think our self-interest should be about our liberty, but also the liberty of everybody else. And when you're talking about reform, we need the government to legalize marijuana. It sucks. I wish we didn't have to depend on them. I wish we could do the free man on the land thing and pretend no laws apply to us and I walk around free and screw you government, you have no power over me. But when those cuffs go on and when they take your money, yeah, whether they're legitimate or not, you're going to suffer the consequences. And so you have to deal with the oppressors, you have to deal with the government, and that requires a bit of faith. Because who turns to the people who were putting them in jail and taking their tax dollars to punish them and ostracize them and condemn them as scum of society, and then be like, yeah, okay, but now we'll work with you to make things better. It's a little uncomfortable, but you have to. Because if you let government legalize it for their own self-interest, they're going to tax it to the top, they're going to restrict it to the max, and they're going to do it that way unless they hear from the people who want to make a difference. You might hate what government does, but if you keep saying to them, you suck, I hate you, I don't trust you, when they want to adopt your position, do you think they're going to come to you for advice? No. They're going to go to the people who said, hey, listen, I understand you're put in this horrible position, this law. It's forcing you to do bad things. I know you must hate it. It must be so hard for you. So let's work together to make something good. And, you have to work with the oppressors in the way that Mark's own prosecutor, John McKay, district attorney of Western Washington, he came out in favor of legalization the year after Mark got extradited. And I was invited to the Washington State Legislature to testify in favor of an earlier legalization bill beside him. And he was very shocked and uncomfortable to realize that Marc Emery's wife was going to be there with him, and he almost backed out, but he didn't. And when I met him and shook his hand, and I went up to him and said, I'm Marc Emery's wife, Jodie Emery, and he goes, I never met your husband. And I said, I know. Nothing personal there. I just want to say thank you for taking the stand, because you've been on the front lines, and people will listen to you, because he's not pro-pot, but he's against prohibition, and he's been a prohibitionist enforcing those laws, so I thanked him. And that led to him agreeing to come up to Vancouver and hold a press conference with me, a former Attorney General of our province, and the top doctor of HIV and AIDS and harm reduction, and the four of us sat together, and he pulled up my chair, and I sat beside him, and we said, legalize it together. And the media, national media, said, how can you sit beside the man who put your husband away? And I said, the law made him do it. I mean, it wasn't personal for him. The law that exists forces people in his position to do that sort of thing. And, that's kind of letting him off the hook a little bit. He went, oh, that was awesome. He's grateful. And then he started sponsoring the legalization bill that came up next. And he let Mark and I be official endorsers next to his name on the legalization bill of Washington State. So, yeah, it can be uncomfortable to turn to your oppressors and work with them. But if you don't, think of who is going to advise them. Think of what kind of recommendations they are going to get. What kind of model will they have? Because we toured with Dr. João Goulão of Portugal. He's an advisor to the United Nations, and he was implemented the decriminalization of all drugs there. And he told us that unfortunately, since that happened, the decrim of drugs, they took care of the problems it was meant to address, but the appetite for more reform has evaporated. And they're looking to other countries like Uruguay to say, well, what are they going to do, and should we do that? But in the meantime, a lot of countries are just kind of sitting back and going, Colorado, Washington, and then Alaska, Oregon, and Washington, D.C. this year. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world. What models should we use? What models exist? And I'd say take whatever good model you can get and work to make it better. In Canada, we have some steps forward and steps back. I mean, even though our government has restricted personal gardens for patients, there are more dispensaries and more pot than ever before. Now, there's more pot because America's growing too much of their own, and they don't want ours anymore, but that's okay. More for Canadians. So we have a lot of different models that are being introduced, a lot of different models that might be flawed in some way, but as long as you're able to take the best parts out of those models and introduce them to your own government, that'll help. Because it takes time to make change. Like I said, I went from being pro-pot and anti-everything else to understanding that prohibition as a policy is a failure. Prohibition of any substance, of any activity is a failure. But what's really upsetting about marijuana prohibition, which is even worse than prohibiting alcohol, is that cannabis is an incredible plant. It has more uses than anything else, and Mark will talk about it when he comes back. He goes into a lot of that. But You know, cannabis isn't just a wonderful plant for patients and sick people. It can be used industrially, for clothing, to make cars. Henry Ford made a car that was indestructible with a sledgehammer. It's a famous photo of him trying to dent that car, and it won't dent. And today, imagine how many people on the roads are dying in car accidents and metal machines that crumple and crush them. And meanwhile, hemp composite could actually save people from car accidents. And hemp houses. We were just in Ireland, we stopped by a hemp house. I've seen this before on books and everything. I've never seen it in person. It's incredible, it's beautiful. It's just lime, water, and hempcrete. And it's walls that keep you cool in the summer, keep you warm in the winter, with no heating or anything required. And isn't just good because it's hemp, but it's carbon negative. It removes pollution from the air and sucks it into the walls and keeps it there. Sounds crazy. I sound like one of those crazy hippie people I was talking about. Hemp will save the world, but it kind of can. These hemp houses are being promoted as an opportunity for people who live in slums around the world to make their own houses for next to nothing. Houses that are fireproof and floodproof too. Hemp is amazing. But medical marijuana is even more amazing. What's really frustrating is the last parts of reefer madness that still float around are, oh, what about the children? And to that I say, well, what about the children? Dr. Sanjay Gupta is on CNN saying, give cannabis medicine to kids. It's saving their lives. So obviously cannabis isn't going to be bad for kids if it's saving their lives. There's all sorts of ways it can be used to treat ADHD, epilepsy, all sorts of ailments, and even just to encourage healthy brain and body growth, because cannabinoids actually build body cells and brain cells. That's been proven too. And what's also really frustrating with propaganda is cannabis causes cancer. We've all heard that. Oh, when you smoke a joint, you're smoking like 40 cigarettes worth, you're going to get cancer. Well, there is no cancer from marijuana. Cancerous tumors are killed by cannabis, by cannabinoids. And there's a lot of science going on this. It sounds crazy too. If you go around saying, cannabis cures cancer, it sounds like an absolute nutcase idea. But it's true. There are doctors in Madrid and Israel and different places who are finding that THC and CBD injected into tumors kills them. This isn't just made up. This is true, and you don't have to believe me. You can look it up. So we're dealing with a government that's not only just banning a substance just because they want to, either make money arresting people or keep gangs employed. I don't know what their motive is. Well, I do, but the point is, marijuana is actually extraordinarily beneficial for society, and it can cure one of the worst ailments that everybody here fears. Everybody fears cancer. Everybody knows about cancer. It's a terrible thing. And cannabis, not only does it hold the cure for cancer in some way that I think pharmaceutical companies are getting into, but it also makes you less stressed. If you're not sick and you're generally healthy, or maybe if your husband's in prison for years, you might want to keep your stress levels down. And cannabis helps do that. Cannabis reduces stress. And most sickness and illness in life is caused in some way by stress. And if you can use cannabis preventatively to stay healthy and not get sick, why can't we do that? Why do you have to get sick before you're allowed to use cannabis? And what about that other argument that cannabis is dangerous for you because it's unhealthy, and yet some people say, oh, well, medical marijuana is okay. If you're healthy, marijuana will do terrible things to you. If you're sick and dying and really ill and frail, it'll help you out a lot. That's a serious disconnect. But more and more people are coming around to realizing that, including myself. It took me time to realize that. So there's certain ways when you talk to people, you have to decide what you want to present to them. I'm not going to go to some mother who's concerned about her kids smoking pot and say, oh, but don't worry, it cures cancer. That's not going to fly with her. You're going to have to choose the approach to work with the audience you're speaking to. So that mother should be told that a criminal record will harm her child far worse than marijuana use ever could. That the choice of marijuana or alcohol means a devastating drug that is responsible for rape, assault, murder, disease, and death every day, or cannabis, which hasn't killed anybody. You can talk to the mom about how prohibition creates gangs. You can talk to that parent in that way, and you don't need to mention that hemp houses remove pollution from the air. You can talk to other people about that. There's certainly a huge industry out there in sustainable, clean living and building, and they need to hear more about hemp. But when you come to prohibition, I'm going to try and wrap this up pretty quick, I don't want to go too long, but it's very upsetting to know that not only are we being lied to repeatedly, but that what we're being lied to is an incredible plant that has so many uses. We don't even know about all the other ways it could be beneficial. And when it comes to the marijuana movement, there are going to be different approaches. We need people on the grassroots who are talking about healthy living, staying away from monopolies, relying on the earth and on plants. But you also need those white-coated doctors who are doing the research and saying to people, look, Alzheimer's is prevented by cannabis use. You won't get Alzheimer's if you use cannabis. That's actually being proven. These things are happening. And you need all those different areas. And when it comes to any sort of fight for freedom, whether it's women's rights, when they were fighting to not be property, or fighting for the right to vote, and today they still fight for equality in many ways, or even African Americans, from slavery to Obama being in the White House, that took time, obviously. But you didn't have people in the beginning saying it's all or nothing. You take what you can get and you work for more. And you work in the area that you're more comfortable in and become an expert at that. Because with marijuana prohibition, we're spending so much money destroying lives, and there are so many lives to be saved. And when it comes to prisons and seeing the suffering of families that I didn't suffer as much as others. Of course, I had so much support, but the human cost is just enormous. We cannot afford it financially or morally to keep destroying lives over marijuana prohibition. And when we look at different models of reform, whatever might be proposed, try and change it, try and influence it. If it doesn't work, try again, never give up. The fight for freedom will never, ever, ever end until all people give up. And I hope that never happens, but you have to take little steps. And when it comes to freedom of choice, that's one of my main concerns when it comes to all my activism, is that I hear all these worries about monopolies, worries about Canada's medical marijuana program allowing private companies to grow. They're eliminating personal gardens and forcing patients to grow from companies. I don't think they should eliminate the gardens, but I sure think there should be companies. Of course they should. Freedom of choice. We should allow people to grow their own plant, go to the farmer's market, trade it with their neighbor, or go down to the local grocer who has organic local produce and maybe get some bud from him, or go to the mass market, the jumbo chain store, and they've got all their marijuana too. It's similar to coffee or beer or wine. You can go get craft beer, or you can get the basic stuff. And cigarettes, some people really like fancy little cigarettes, and some people just get generic. And coffee, some people pay just $1 for a cup of coffee at home, and others will go get that $7 fancy coffee. But it's freedom of choice. And as long as you have the ability to choose where you want to go to get your access, that's really important. Because my dream, the ideal model for me, is that you can grow your own plant at home, take those leaves, juice it, drink that juice, smoke that bud, or vaporize it, or whatever way you might do. But if you have an illness, you go to your cupboard and you take that bottle of pills, and you know that those pills are going to cure your illness because it's been scientifically proven and pharmaceutically designed to treat that. My concern with pharmaceutical companies is that they often like monopolies, patents. They don't want others to have what they have. But as long as we're always fighting in the bigger realm for freedom of choice, whether it's monopolies on where your power or energy comes from, or gasoline or whatever, monopoly and government favoritism is always bad. But we always have to fight for freedom of choice. So freedom of choice to grow your own, to smoke your own, to vaporize your own, to buy from the store. Heck, let the government have a shot. Let them try and sell weed. They probably won't do very well, because in a free market, people go where they want to go. With a free market, they spend their dollar where they want to spend it. And as long as we don't restrict people from having access in some way, then we're doing the right thing. And I dream of a day when pharmaceutical companies are allowed to create cures and lotions that can heal burns and all sorts of medicines, but we must always fight for the right to continue to grow our own and be personally taking care of our health without depending on them. But you take what you can get. Again, medical marijuana in California, not perfect. Legalization in Washington State, not perfect either. Uruguay's model, not perfect. Spain, not perfect. Nothing's ever perfect. But as long as you always have the ideal perfect vision in your mind, and you do what you can to work towards that, I'll close up with a little description I often imagine, because people think of moving towards freedom and liberty as like a path. You feel like you're moving as a movement, moving forward, right? If you're in the past, you're in the past. If you want to change things, you feel like you're moving forward. And when you move forward, I feel like the path to freedom has many stones, and many were laid in years past from people who fought in armors and on horses for freedom, and every which variety of freedom fighters. They've laid their stones down, they've done their time. Some of them have bigger stones and bigger names, Martin Luther King Jr., you know, there's people who stand out in history, and we look at them, Rosa Parks, and we know they weren't the only ones who did something. We know that they also walked on the path that many people contributed to before. And when you think of your own activism, what you can do, whether it's just holding up a sign for 2 hours to show your commitment to an idea, or calling into a radio show, or joining Students for Sensible Drug Policy or Normal, or running for a political party like I've done before and plan to do federally again, take some form of action and know that even if you aren't going to get to that freedom, victory, end line, your stone you lay down might not get you to that door of freedom, but at least if you're working to lay down those stones, people ahead of you, people in the future, the children now who will always fight under oppression, and everyone will always struggle against oppressors. But the people in the future, they might not know the work you did, but at least you know that you helped out by laying down the stone in the path to freedom so that they can keep going like others before you did. And that's all we can hope to do. All right, thanks.
The Cannabis Cape Crusader, the Crown Prince of Pot, Mr. Marc Emery. Thanks very much. I take that Prince of Pot term seriously. I don't hear the other ones too often. But the media does say Prince of Pot, and I would normally I would even say, but it would be a lie, that I never use that term. I certainly never say that in any kind of social media. But I did have a show on Pot TV for about 5 years. It was called The Prince of Pot. So I have used it, I guess, years ago as a title. But I really take that title seriously in a way, because when I get called that, I really hope that the people out there like you, cannabis smokers, cannabis growers, sellers, people enthusiasts, legalizers, anti-prohibitorists, think I've done enough good work that I have somehow in some way earned that title, and that is a title usually offered in a sense of respect, and that I hope I live up to your expectations as a spokesperson, speaking perhaps on your behalf for the last 25 years. So I do hope that I've earned that title, and when you see it, you have a good feeling about that when you see me referred to as the Prince of Pot. I will tell you though, really, I'm more the convict of cannabis compared to many. I've been arrested 28 times for marijuana-related things. I've actually never sold pot or been convicted of selling or growing pot. It's actually 28 things related to cannabis I've been arrested for. And I have been convicted and jailed for 23 different occasions. I've actually tried to get arrested. I'm somewhere in the high 40s, about 47, 48 times I've tried to get arrested. Like I said, I've been arrested 28 times. And the reason I started being civilly disobedient is after years of political, working with political parties and participating in elections, by the mid-1980s I was very frustrated by the seemingly slow, incremental nature of politics. And I wanted things to really start happening. In 1987, the Canadian government banned all books and magazines about marijuana. And they put all the head shops out of business. We used to call them head shops. I don't like that term anymore, and I discourage anyone from saying that term. I used to call them hemp shops or cannabis culture stores or things like that. But in 1987, the government of Canada banned all books and magazines about marijuana, and they put all the head shops out of business, mostly run by actually Pakistani people or immigrants who sold a lot of incense, a lot of kind of interesting paraphernalia that seemed like a holdover from the 60s and 70s. And they were selling these things. And the government passed a law that, first of all, by the way, the law against marijuana hasn't changed in Canada for like 50 years. The situation in Canada has changed a lot, but the law hasn't changed. It still says if you possess marijuana in amounts that are personal possession, you face up to a $2,000 fine and 6 months in jail. Some combination of that at the most. But the offense for distributing a book about marijuana or a magazine about marijuana was actually a $100,000 fine and or 6 months in jail. 50 times greater for a book or an implement that told the truth or was about our culture than it was actually to even possess marijuana itself. And that was a bit of a clue, because I learned
I don't know if any of you people are into punk music, but I used to like a punk band in the 1980s called the Dead Kennedys. They're considered one of the seminal punk bands of all time, and their lead singer was a smart fellow named Jello Biafra, and I had a campus radio show in the late 80s, and I really admired him, and he has spoken word records, and I brought him to give a spoken word performance in my hometown of London, Ontario, Canada. We also have a Thames River there too, and it's modeled a lot on this London, for that matter. And I brought him to our hometown, and part of his, stand-up routine, which was a serious talk, was about a book he had read by Jack Rare called The Emperor Wears No Clothes, and it shows up in one of his albums called I Blow Minds for a Living, and it's called Grow More Pot. And he talks about how he doesn't actually smoke pot, doesn't really even agree with pot, but that Americans had been lied to about the nature of cannabis and what had happened to it. And he spoke about this book by Jack Rare named The Emperor Wears No Clothes. It's actually the seminal book on cannabis from my generation of activists in the early 90s. In the 90s it was very influential, and you'll notice that most of the key activists in America that are doing things today were greatly affected by that book. And it talks about how cannabis has actually been part of our history for 10, 12,000 years. It's the oldest husbanded, deliberately grown plant in agriculture. It's always had dozens and dozens of medicinal uses. In fact, Pope Innocent in 1484 made marijuana a crime punishable by death and as heresy, heretical medicine. And in the wake of that, an estimated 1 to 2 million women throughout Europe, including even Great Britain when it was briefly Catholic in the 1500s, it made them punishable by burning at the stake. And in fact, there is lots of historical evidence to show that up to 1.5 million women did die from actually potions they made and lotions, salves, and balms and ointments that contain cannabis in it. I recently spoke in Spain in a place called San Sebastian, and just 10 kilometers away they have a shrine to an event in 1590 where 45 women were burned at the stake as witches, and around that area grew marijuana and other plants that they used to do it. So this actually really did happen. But you wouldn't really know that when you hear about the Spanish Inquisition. You don't know that they were largely female medicine women and healers working with cannabis. And the history of cannabis as hemp was never available to any. And at school, I did not learn that all the ropes and riggings that brought people to Canada and the United States were made of cannabis, and that the reason Napoleon invaded Russia was to seize their hemp fields so he could make sails and rigging for the French Navy, because the British had a blockade of France that didn't allow them to get hemp, and they couldn't re-rig and refit their ships during times of extended periods of war, like the period up to 1812, 1815. So all this, I had never heard of it before, and he said this book was really a major thing. And when I get to read it, it is a really major book, but what I discovered was that the government had banned it. The government of Canada had banned every book about marijuana. So previously, I had been involved in economic issues where I applied civil disobedience, and I learned some interesting things. For example, in 1986, it's actually a religious law, but they described it as a labor law. All the shops in Canada were forbidden to open on Sunday generally. And I thought this was absurd. And I decided I would break this law and dare them to charge me, because I didn't believe in it, and I wanted to make a point that it's wrong. So I broke the law 8 weeks in a row, the Sunday shopping laws, blue laws they were called. And one particular event was very interesting. On the Sunday, the day before Christmas, Christmas Eve, I dressed up as Santa Claus, bought an ad in the paper, said I'm going to give away books for free to show the absurdity of this law. Not only do I not even have to sell anything to break the law, I just have to open my doors and let people in, and I'm in violation of the law. So I bought an ad, I invited the police to come and charge me, and I gave away $10 worth of books in my bookshop to everybody who came by that day. It was the Sunday before Christmas. The police are actually right there in the lineup to come in, and I get charged. And I go to court, and I'm convicted, and I refuse to pay the fine, and eventually a big brouhaha ensues, and I get put in jail. And a lot of publicity came with all this, a huge amount of publicity, much to my surprise. And then the government started changing the law. So first they changed the law to make sure all bookshops could open, so that no longer would I be in breach, but other people would be in breach too. But it started a real wave of things, and when I got to court, it was a big deal. And within 6 months, the government abolished all the Sunday blue laws, and all across the country, people started to be able to shop on Sunday. And I thought, well, this is amazing. I even lost in court. I went to jail for a period of time, and then they changed the law. So I had a lot of interests, and so my next one that I picked was in 1990, and the police went around to all the record shops in the city, my hometown, all across the province, and they said, you can't sell this record that's popular. There's a new rap record out, it's by the Two Live Crew, it's all about sex, it's called As Nasty As They Want to Be. You can't sell it, we have ordered. Now, I thought that was extraordinary. I did not know the police on their own initiative could determine something was obscene, that normally a court would have to decide if something was obscene. And so I said, well, that's wrong. So I got hundreds of copies of this thing. I bought another ad in the newspaper, it worked before, and I said, I'm going to sell this band record. I invite everybody to come to my shop. And sure enough, there was a lineup out the door and down the block, and hundreds of people came to buy this. If you want to make something popular, just ban it. And people want to, everybody wants to hear it. It becomes a great sensation. And sure enough, we bought an ad, invited the police to come charge us. The police officer was the second person in the lineup, and he bought one. But we had sold all the copies, and by the time I was raided that afternoon by the police with a search warrant, we had fortunately sold out all the copies, so no loss. And then I went to court, and that was a very funny trial. It was greatly covered by the media, which is what you always want. If you're a civilly disobedient person, you want the attention to your issue. And I figured, well, the worst that's going to happen is he'd give me a fine or a reprimand. I just don't see it likely he's going to send me to jail. So it seemed reasonably low risk, although I went to jail on the Sunday shopping business because I refused to pay the fine, so maybe that would happen here. But the court was fascinating because they got the straightest prosecutor in the world, and rather than play the CD in open court, which is what's really required, he just read the lyrics to it aloud in court. And this took some time because people were in hysterics and howls of laughter. It's all about sex, but it's kind of juvenile, funny sex. And the prosecutor would be reading it in the straightest voice possible, lending dignity to something that should never have dignity. But he would be going, me so horny, me love you long time. And people were just cracking up, rolling it. And the judge would bang the gavel and he'd say, this is not a laughing matter, this is a court of law. But my point was, it's obviously a laughing matter. People are in hysterics. And to me, if people are laughing, it's not obscene. When we think of what's obscene in the world, nobody laughs at death, murder, disease, violence, war, refugees, homelessness. Those aren't funny things, those are obscene. We look at them and at our own risk. But this was a courtroom that was in howls of laughter, but I was found guilty. But the publicity was so negative towards the police and the government and the prosecution that went forward with it that they have never done that ever again. Canada's never had any kind of musical or cultural artifact or presentation banned. Even art presentations, live shows, you can do it all now. You can have live sex shows in Canada or theater that has sex in it. It's almost, you can probably do almost anything under our Charter of Rights. And then I learned, wow, second time I've lost in court, and second time it was effective in achieving its desired goals. So in 1991, I realized all books and magazines were banned. And I put an ad in the paper, and I said, I've got this book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, and told them to come and charge me, we were going to sell it. And indeed, we did sell probably over 100 copies. By the time 1991 came around, there was a lot of pent-up demand. Like I say, there was no culture of any kind in Canada by that time. Everything had been banned and taken off the shelves, and it was totally unavailable. Even good marijuana was really not available in my home city of London, Ontario. So I announced that I was selling this book, and they didn't come and charge me. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to up the ante then. I'm going to get every possible marijuana grow guide, back issues of High Times, everything I could find to do with marijuana, heaps of the stuff. And then I bought another ad, and I said, okay, I'm selling, you can't ignore me now. I'm definitely selling everything you don't want me to sell, breaking the law, so come and charge me. And we did have tremendous sales. We would sell a lot of these books, hundreds of them, pent-up demand, and people all over the country were ordering them. And eventually, they don't come and charge me, and eventually by 3 or 4 years later, I become one of the largest wholesalers in Canada of these banned books and magazines. I'm bringing in thousands each month of High Times over the border and distributing them to hundreds of shops, and I've literally replaced the regular thing. And then we do get charged, but not for selling all these books. What happens is it was common practice in Canada, and it's a very nefarious practice, to send an attractive police undercover officer, probably newly hired on the force. I can't imagine being much younger than 19 or 20, but sending them into a high school and just going around and asking everybody they can, pretty well every male in the place, if they know where you can get some weed for me. The woman would say, do you know where I can get some weed? Well, even if they didn't smoke pot or didn't deal pot, if you see an attractive woman who appears older and worldly and attractive and is asking you of all people in a high school to score weed, you're going to all say, and they did, every last one, I get you weed. I absolutely can get you weed. And they end up charging 52 kids, 52 boys in that school with trafficking because they were holding out that they could get weed. And it was a big roundup. And to me, it was a total disgrace, ruining all these people's lives. So we went out and gave up pamphlets. Actually, it was Normal Canada. And we gave up pamphlets in front of that school. It basically said, know your rights. It was a pamphlet about knowing your rights, what you have to say to police, what's right and what's wrong, what you can get away with. Just trying to inform them, but also lend a bit of support to the students in that school. And then the police did, in fact, charge us for distributing illegal drug literature. And all we were doing is saying, know your rights. And we went to court, and I financed that with what I later ended up doing with Seeds. And we got that struck down. That's the first court case I've ever won. It even might be the only case I've ever won. But it did establish, and the judge said, clearly this law is unconstitutional, and we're throwing it out because you can't ban true facts about things, no matter what subject it is, under our Charter of Rights. So that was a great success. So in 1994, that's when we got that done, I started a campaign that started by legalizing books and magazines. We got that done. And then I started publishing my own magazine, Cannabis Culture Magazine. That went on for 15 years and 75 issues and came out every 2 months, and something I'm very proud of. And I came up with this, I've always thought of myself as kind of like the hero in my own movie. And I thought, I believe it is possible for one man to legalize marijuana single-handedly if you have to. If you have to, there's a way to do it. And so I thought, I need to recreate what we don't have. In Canada, we have nothing, so we need to recreate the legality of books and magazines. We need to have more hemp stores all across Canada. We need to have communication. We need to have magazines. Later on, I started out the first marijuana video site in the world, Pot TV, which came out in January 2000. And in fact, there was no video service on the internet at that time. It was too expensive and impossible to do. And Pot TV does end up costing $1 million in its first 6 years, doesn't make a dime. But it was an experiment where I think we need to have these things. We need to have magazines, we need to have stores, we need to have communication, we need to have political entities. And to that degree, I thought, to really recreate a proper structure for a culture, we're going to need a lot of money. And so one thing I wanted to teach everybody in our movement back in those days is we shouldn't be sneering at money. We shouldn't be negative towards capitalism. We need to embrace a model whereby we are all encouraged to get into business, to be in business, to respect money and what it can do, and to advance our movement through a variety of things, but certainly not condemning the earning of money in doing so. So we got magazines and books legalized, and we also that year came out with a hemp store. And we were pretty well the first hemp store in Canada that had been around for 6 years. Nobody was selling bongs, pipes, anything like that. And we opened a store up in downtown Vancouver called Hemp BC, and I immediately put out a pamphlet after we were in business for 6 months. We did $1 million in sales in the first 6 months. It was incredible. And I put out a pamphlet saying, you can do this in your hometown. You can take this agenda I have, and you can recreate this store with as little as just $10,000. You could start a store in your own hometown and recreate all this, and you'll be so successful that you'll get money coming in, and you can expand and do all sorts of great things. And indeed, when I put out that pamphlet, it was the most popular thing I've ever written, because within the first year, 60 stores across Canada show up imitating our model. And in fact, I promised them I will even sell you the inventory that you need to start with that I guarantee will be successful. And if you don't sell everything or anything that I've sent you, we will take it back at a full refund, and you'll never be out any money. And I thought that would be the kind of guarantee that would get people to quit their jobs and start opening their own business and becoming cannabis capitalists. And that's exactly what I wanted, and we did have that. And I've met since then probably over 200 people who have businesses that they directly ascribe to that brochure I wrote on how to do it, but also my example that you can do it. Even when it's currently still illegal in Canada to sell bongs and pipes, but now we've been doing it rather provocatively and openly all across the country for 20 years. So on one hand, there is legalization that we seek, and then there's making it legal on the ground, in the face of its prohibition. So we got hemp stores going, they were all across the country, and then I decided when I went to Amsterdam in 1994 and I gave the report in an activist report about what was going on in Canada, and I basically, all I could say is, well, we opened the first hemp store that Canada's seen in like 8 years, and we got books and magazines legalized. But essentially, you know, that didn't sound very impressive. It was impressive to me because it all was achieved within 2 or 3 years. But Ben Dronkers got up with the Sensi Seed Bank and he says, well, in the last year we sold 1 million seeds and that produced 10,000 tons of, you know, like he was just rattling off these incredible things and saying we've affected the amount of marijuana grown on the planet Earth by this much. And it was just these wonderful things. And I got up and I remember saying, I love that guy. That's my idea of a revolution, right, is creating so much weed. So I came back to Canada and we immediately started selling seeds. No one in North America was selling seeds, and I quickly became the world's largest seed seller. And we got raided many times, 4 times in 1996, 97, and 98. Every time they took away all my seeds, all the bongs and pipes. Actually, they took away everything. And they even tried to shut down our magazine in that time. But we always opened up the next day. And sometimes they didn't even charge me. They would take up to $500,000 worth of stuff and then they would just go. And they would just hope that you've been ruined, right? And this often happens in raids and stuff like that. So along with the 28 times I've been arrested and 23 times I've been jailed, I've actually been raided 5 times as well. But didn't deter me. In fact, to spite them, after they raided me the first time on July 4th, 1996, 2 weeks later, I got an opportunity for a little space, so I opened a grow shop. The first grow shop that was catering specifically to marijuana. And it was the only thing I could do to be in your face saying, I am not repentant, I am not cowed. Not only am I rebuilding my seed shop and everything that you took away with all the bungs and pipes, but now I have a grow shop and we're going to show people how to grow marijuana. Eventually, that shop becomes enormous growing. The little grow shop becomes huge. And eventually, it's the only time in my life I've seen $1,000 bills. Because every day, I should have figured something out, but a guy in a really slick car in Chinese with sunglasses would come up, give me like $8,000 and say I want 8 light systems fully installed, because we quickly became a one-stop shop. I'm a very arrogant guy. We're not just going to show you how to grow it. We'll install it for you. You know, so I had an electrician on staff, and he would go and wire your place, and then the other guy would go in and take it, and he would install it all in there, right? And he'd put it up for you, and all you had to do is give me the money, and I would just pay everybody to go to whatever address. And amazingly, no one ever got compromised. You know, our people never told the police where they did it or what was going on. So we had a grow shop helping set people up, and then I sold the seeds to everybody who were having these grow shops. And the idea with that seeds is not that I particularly am a botanist or into seeds particularly, but I needed a way to raise a lot of money really quick, because my idea was we need lots of money. Because as a political movement, we're going to need to do things. So I immediately started selling seeds, and we did make a lot of money. We also got raided a lot, and that was the problem. But in the meantime, I was giving away money. So eventually, between 1995 and 2005, I gave away $5 million to activist groups all across North America. Even around the world, we gave money to the Israeli Green Leaf Party, which was their marijuana party at the time. We bought full-page ads in the 1999 New Zealand election for the legalized Cannabis Party and what have you there. And actually, that actually caused quite a bit of trouble, because the Green Party, and they have proportional representation in New Zealand, the Green Party was very worried that my support of the marijuana party, buying them ads, giving them publicity, you know, funneling money to them, would actually threaten them getting members in Parliament. Now, they do just make the threshold of 5%, and they do get members in Parliament, so they stopped being upset with me. But you know, I was starting to have like impact on foreign elections, which was remarkable. And then we eventually used the money to get signatures for a ballot initiative in Washington, D.C. in 1998. And we succeed. We get the signatures and we pass a medical marijuana initiative. Then in Colorado in 2000, I was one of the principal financiers from the sale of these seeds for their medical marijuana initiative in the year 2000. And that turns out to be successful, as did Arizona in the same year, but it was overturned later on by the courts because it required a doctor's signature on prescription. They're not legally allowed to do that. And then we financed other things, Alaska in 2000, 2002, 2004, their ballot initiatives, and gave lots of money to those. I was also suing the U.S. federal government in a big class action suit to restore medical marijuana to the compassionate use program that used to exist in the United States in the 1970s, and that cost about $40,000 to bring 80 witnesses to Philadelphia for a week-long trial. And so all these things were going on. Eventually I go to the Canadian Supreme Court, and I pay for us to get there for a judgment as to whether marijuana prohibition is even constitutional. So I'm earning lots of money from the sale of seeds. We're expanding the number of hemp stores across Canada and encouraging people to open it up. I've got a magazine communicating all these ideas to everybody. We eventually have a video thing. And at the same time, I'm breaking the law all the time as well. Like not only am I breaking the law on a daily basis, but I'm also provocatively trying to get arrested. In 2003, I went across Canada with a very colorful bong or a 1 ounce joint, depending on what I felt like. And the 1 ounce joints were actually a lot more fun, but a bong also looks good in a photograph. You know, if it's a nice fancy bong, it's clear you're lighting something up, but it's also not whereas a 1 ounce joint is actually 14 inches long, it's huge, and everybody really wants to have a hit of that joint, rather, 14. And so I would go across and I would get arrested in 6 of them. 12 of them I didn't get arrested, 6 of them I got arrested, put in jail overnight, had to make bail the next day, and that happened in various cities. And so in total I've actually been arrested in 7 out of 10 provinces for marijuana. Again, and never selling. I've been convicted of promoting vaporizers. One of our many projects was, we came up in 1997, Hemp BC became a massive concern, and the little grow shop was a huge grow shop. And we're going to get raided shortly because it's really expanding so rapidly, and that's what happens. And then we also spent a lot of money from that seeds on the Cannabis Cafe, and it was a state-of-the-art place in its time. All the food, we served food there and had beautiful tables and booths, and every single thing on our menu contained hemp seeds or some derivative of hemp in it. There was hemp oil in the salads, there was hemp flour in the breads, there was hemp butters and all sorts of things in the cooking. Hemp was in every aspect of all the food we served, and at the same time there was a vaporizer at every table. In those days I considered it a state-of-the-art vaporizer. Now it's to laugh because vaporizers have moved ahead so fantastically in 17 years. But unfortunately we got raided and they closed it down. No particular reason, we weren't selling cannabis, but they took away all our vaporizers and they took away the instructions. And eventually I get convicted of all things because the instructions explain how to use the vaporizer at your table, and that was illegal because I was aiding and abetting someone breaking the law. So promoting vaporizers actually constituted an offense. So I've been convicted of that. I've been convicted of giving half a gram of hash to an American tourist who, instead of smoking it at his table like he was supposed to, goes back to the United States, actually gets caught when a drug dog goes through his car, and he actually tells him I gave it to him. Like, I'm thinking, he's like hundreds of miles away, or from the border, and you're telling them. Sure enough, they are excited by this, so they actually charge me, put me in jail for the weekend for trafficking, because I gave someone, I can't believe this, right? When I'm looking at the details, really? Wow. And how do they expect to make that stick? And they said they're going to fly him here to testify against you. I said, really? Half a gram of hash and Americans actually going to come? I said, well, they said they probably threatened to take away his car and his kids or something if he didn't do it. So that's why he's willing. And he actually comes back, and I sit there in the court going, I kind of understand because he's probably been blackmailed. Why else would he come up there? And he wouldn't even look at me. He was just totally red-faced, horrified that he was there. But I got convicted and fined $2,000 for that one. And I've been, one morning at 4 a.m, I remember this one. This is strange. I've got a child in the house and my partner at the time, and this is in the year 2001. 2002, and I get a call and the phone rings, and it's 4 a.m. Always when you get a call at 4 a.m, it's probably bad. So I pick up and they go, is this Marc Emery? And I go, yes. Are you alone in the house? I'm going, no, I have a child and a woman in the house with you. Well, this is the Victoria PD. We want you to go to the front door and stand and walk out to the sidewalk because we have your house surrounded. And I'm looking, you have my house surrounded. Why do you have? So I say, all right. So I actually go to the front door with the phone, and I don't see anybody. And they say, then you hear a loudspeaker, walk to the sidewalk. And so I walk to the sidewalk. And then finally, 8 fully militarized SWAT team cops come out from behind trees and trucks, and they're going to come through. And they come up, Mr. Emery, you're under arrest. And go, why? For running a grow house. A grow house, and then now I'm thinking, this is awesome because this is not a grow. There's nothing in this house, right? So they come through, sure enough, it's 4, and they walk through, and they're all heavily, I have no idea what they're expecting if they go to a grow house. I've never seen anybody who's been raided for pot fire back with weapons or anything. Like, it'd be crazy. Why would you know? You're going to have to accept whatever happens. But the fact they're so prepared and they're so psyched up for violence. So anyway, they go through the whole house and they find nothing. And the sad-looking officers, right? Because this is what they're going to do. This is their whole shift. There's nothing else they're doing that day. They had a meeting for 3 hours about what they're going to do. They went out to they staked out the house, determined, got the occupants identified so they don't kill the child that's in the house. Because that's what because we want to make sure we don't do anything really dangerous to kill the kid, right? But it's okay. We'd come busting through if we thought there was no child there. So then they come through and they forlornly look, no, there's nothing there. And then the guy says, well, first, by the way, they said, I guess it's obvious why we're here, because he comes in the house and he sniffs. And I go, what do you mean it's obvious why you're here? Well, that smell. I said, that smell is the smell you'd smell 24 hours a day around me. That just means I've been smoking pot. Are you here for that? No, we know you're running a grow house. Well, they go through, they find out they're disappointed. And he says, well, I guess, you're off the hook, and we apologize, and they went away, right? So that was one of my shortest arrests. I was arrested for all of like 10 minutes there. But I've been arrested coming off the ferry from West Vancouver to go into Vancouver, and they arrest me and they handcuff me and they put me in the back of a squad car. Well, everybody's going by. That's always the most humiliating part. Oh, I hope nobody knows me that's driving by and seeing me up against the car, because people all think the worst. You must have done something bad. And it turns out that the police officer said, well, we got a report of you having a big bag of weed in your car. And I hold it up. I said, this is like 2 grams. This is the big bag of weed? Apparently. And the cop says, so as you know, Mr. Emery, but after an hour being handcuffed while all these cars are coming off the ferry and going by, we're going to let you go because charges wouldn't stick if we gave them to you anyway. So I said, I know that. So, but 2 grams, you're actually having a big day over 2 grams? I mean, that's like remarkable. So anyway, it's always been stuff like that. Some degree harassment, other degrees deliberate provocation, other times raided because of all my public stances, sometimes getting arrested deliberately by buying ads. But all of it towards one consistent goal that I hoped would go on almost forever, and that was raise a lot of money, distribute it all over the world, fuck shit up, do all sorts of great things, be civilly disobedient, teach everybody in our culture to be good capitalists and business people and learn how to use money appropriately. And then I would create political parties. I spent $160,000 in 2001 alone in the British Columbia Marijuana Party, where we fielded candidates in every riding and did a great job in the election and got 3% of the vote, which is considerable really for an all marijuana party. Made a lot of good impacts, and also we were able to lecture all the other candidates too from all the other parties, and that's one of the great things about running in elections. So I envisioned that I had kind of jump-started everything. We had now books and magazines. We had commercial outlets all across the country. We had millions of plants being grown from all the seeds I was selling all across the world in North America. We had stores everywhere. We had video representation. We had every kind of cultural thing going on, political parties, advocacy. It was going great. And then I got arrested in 2005 by the U.S. federal government, and that changed everything. But that's a brief resume of what I have done. But one of the things that I want to tell you is why I have done it. Because I've actually met people that say, well, why do you care so much about cannabis? I mean, what's that, 25 years, Emery? Like, why do you care? Isn't there more important things like poverty, hunger, and all those other things? And I said, no, there isn't. This is a colossal injustice on an epic scale that is unfathomable in any other mindset. For the last 50 years, since 1963, actually that's 51, 34 million people around the world have been arrested for marijuana. Now, half that's in the United States and Canada. Canada's had about 2 million arrests, and America's had about 15 million arrests in the last 45 years. It's a staggering amount, and the rest are Europe and around the world, people being arrested for marijuana. And several million of those 34 million went to jail for considerable amounts of time. So that's not a trivial thing. And also, it's gone on for 3 generations. So to me, it says this. I also believe that the marijuana culture is the greatest culture in the modern history of mankind. And it's not an idle boast. I just want you to look at all the music we have consumed for the last 50 years. Think about the music we have consumed, and that the people who don't smoke pot have enjoyed as well as those who do smoke pot. In fact, a much larger proportion of the world, because about 250 million people around the world consume cannabis, so that means the other 6.5 billion to 7 billion don't consume cannabis, at least not on a regular basis, although they should, and our job is to make sure they do at some point in time. And because they're going to thank you for it. Right, I mean, one of the terrible policies, and by the way, I'll jump back and forth, so I'll ask you to keep track of where I am in case I need you to reel me back into where I was. And in fact, having said that, I forgot where I was going with that one. Okay, so what was the last thing I said? Okay, so music. Donald Trump was speaking to Sacha Baron Cohen, the Ali G character once, in a great setup. They set him up. Donald Trump, he didn't know who Ali G was, and Ali G says, I've got this great idea and I want you to throw it at you because you're the world's most impressive businessman. And Ali G is fawning over Donald Trump and feeding his ego, so to lure him into the sketch. And Ali G says, I've got the greatest invention for the most popular thing people like to do. And Donald Trump says, the most popular thing for human beings is music. Now, Donald Trump can be a blowhard, but he was dead on about that. Everybody on the planet loves music. You just don't meet people who say, no, don't like music, don't listen to it. There's probably a few people like that, but you won't run into them. Nobody wants to admit they don't like music. What kind of person would that be, right? Everybody loves music. So when you think about everybody loves music, Donald Trump says that's the most popular commodity on earth is music. Every human being either plays music, listens to music, wants to make music. We are a musical culture. All our movies have musical soundtracks, television shows have musical sound. Music is everywhere in our life. Now, Ali G's contention is that he has a ice cream cone glove that protects your hand from getting spilled ice. So it's obviously a whole joke. And that part is unimportant, but I decided to conclude that's what he had in mind. And point out that everything from the Beatles to the Rolling Stones to Led Zeppelin to pretty well all rock and roll is cannabis inspired. And you look at the reggae music, Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and virtually every reggae band is inspired and informed by marijuana. You look at the blues musicians from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, all smoked marijuana. Jazz musicians, they're the first people that went to jail for marijuana in America. Lionel Hampton, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong. Jazz musicians have always been associated with cannabis. And even most recently, over time, Willie Nelson, who's like 1,000 years old now, has finally had enough time to smoke out every single other country western artist in America. And now, most country western people, musicians, smoke pot. And so on it goes. In every genre of music you can find, hip-hop certainly is informed by marijuana. Music has been inspired and informed by marijuana to such a great extent that it has changed everything we know about music. So that alone is something that, you say what you want about cannabis, but there's nothing else on earth you can say has been the inspiration to so many great musicians as cannabis. And it's not like cigarettes, alcohol, and everything else out there that people use as an escape or an entertainment is going to provide that kind of richness and greatness. So one of the things I began concerned about is why is marijuana illegal? And why are we hated and hunted down like cannabis? I mean, 34 million people arrested across the whole earth. Like, why do they hate us? So what is it about cannabis that gets them so motivated to spend billions and billions of dollars to lock us up and to deny us our dignity and to condemn us as deviants and people doing a vice, when in fact it's obvious for all to see all the great things that have come from cannabis. And it's not just even the music. You look at business people, Richard Branson, Stephen Jobs, Bill Gates, all were potheads. One of them still is. Richard Branson, and they have done amazing things. They've changed the paradigm for business. These just aren't ordinary entrepreneurs. These are the world's greatest entrepreneurs. And they smoke pot, and so many of them still do. And you look at scientists like Carl Sagan and architects that are being inspired by marijuana, and so many filmmakers and actors and theater people, creative people in every form. I know wrestlers who smoke marijuana before every wrestling match because otherwise their pain from broken limbs and previous injuries is overwhelming for them. You'll find that in Canada we have American football in Canada and they don't urine test, so almost all of them smoke marijuana. And they smoke it pretty early before a game too, like not just on their off days. No, they'll smoke it 2 hours before the game because it puts them in a focus, to focus on the game. Rob Van Dam, a wrestler, told me, he said, what I do when I smoke marijuana is I visualize where I want to go. It's semi-scripted, but a lot of things happen that are unpredictable. I visualize where I want to go, and I also focus on things not related to my pain. And cannabis allows me to do that. It allows me to overlook that I'm going to be getting bruised. I'm going to risk breaking bones. I'm going to, re-injure myself, and all the different pains he has from previous bouts and matches. Sports figures who are doing strenuous work swear by cannabis. So I think, wow, it's incredible what cannabis people have given us in the world of art and science and business. And then you think, well, you know, I've done so much research and met so many people who are crippled up that I was astonished when somebody said, Mark, have you ever known anybody who got Alzheimer's? I said, yeah, my mom died of Alzheimer's, which she did. And he said, but you know, no one who ever has smoked marijuana every day has ever gotten Alzheimer's. Isn't that like kind of remarkable? Because there's like millions of people smoking pot. A lot of people smoke pot until the day they die, but they're not getting Alzheimer's. And that is true. In 30 years, I've never heard of it, never seen it, never seen a recorded, never seen any kind of annotation or anecdote that would suggest that someone who smoked marijuana every day ever got Alzheimer's. And there's lots of science to support why that is. And I know lots of people, especially women, really, who tend to get multiple sclerosis. And I've seen a woman be completely unable to move, who after having a bong hit administered to her got complete recovery of her limbs and her eyesight. I know people with diabetes that use it to regulate their blood sugar. I know people with Crohn's disease who swear by it to reduce the inflammation and the pain they suffer. My old business partner, Michelle, who died of skin cancer 4 years ago, had Crohn's disease since she was a teenager, and marijuana was the only thing that ever helped her out. And I do know that cannabis will increase the efficiency of the prescription medicines you might be taking, but it'll also allow you to get off those prescription medicines entirely and totally and just rely on cannabis therapeutics for so many different ailments. And so I'm thinking, well, this is a wonder for everyone. This isn't just, you know, pot people smoking to get high. These are people who are desperately in need of some medical balm, and cannabis is probably the only thing that works for them for so many things. Like, it's staggering. So I thought, well, how can then we be hated and despised and loathed to the degree that they have had this pogrom going for 45 years and there's some end in sight, but really what's the justification? Like, how can they rationalize doing that to us? We've given them so much as a culture, and we have advised them of so much that they too can benefit by medically, and they still don't. And here's another thing, even if they're religious people, well, Jesus would have worn hemp. If you believe Jesus existed, it's a certainty the clothing he wore were made of sisal, kenaf, or hemp. And hemp is likely the one because it's the one with the longest fibers, and it's the most easily made under, you know, the circumstances of 2,000 years ago into clothing. Like, there's nothing on earth, no plant, no substance that can produce this kind of medicine, this kind of clothing. The sails and riggings of the British Empire were done with cannabis, right? The sails and rigging of the French Empire were all done with it. I mean, these are spectacular things that hemp has been responsible for, that you think everybody would be universally grateful for. Hardly to condemn it, but it's incredible, like all this, what it is. And then there's just that euphoric nature of cannabis. It just makes you feel better. What's not to like about that? What's not to like about feeling better? I mean, the purpose of life, theoretically, is to do things and enjoy doing them, have pleasure. I do know for a fact that routine household work is a lot more fun when you smoke pot, right? And so on it goes. And then I thought, well, what's the worst that's happened to people on pot? I will tell you this. I have seen people overdose. Like, they've had, okay, at my first wedding, I ended up having 4 cakes with a lot of pot in it. 3 ounces. I figured that was good. And each person will get, like, you know, 1 gram or 2 grams in each. But when you cook it up and put it in, it just gets totally, totally strong. Yeah. And the people complained to me later that A, there was no signs on those cakes, and secondly, a lot of people stayed up for like 3 nights in a row or something like that, and other people had strange experiences, but everybody, after 3 days, okay, I'm fine, I recovered from it, right, I forgive you, right, because I was apologizing to everybody for days, and I've actually given a brownie to a person. People give me brownies, and stuff all the time. And I put it in the microwave to heat it up. That's a big mistake. I gave it to her, and then within 5 minutes, she's on the floor in the fetal position, saying, "Oh, I'm dying, I'm dying." I said, and I'm going, "No, you're not dying. You're not dying. You got too much in that brownie." And she goes, "Oh, how long's it been?" I said, "It's been about 5 minutes." "No, it can't be just 5 minutes." I said, "Yeah, just go to bed, go to sleep, you'll be fine in the morning," which was true. So that's the worst. Of 35 years of smoking pot, those are the worst examples. Okay, you can give someone too much, but they're going to be okay in the morning. Right? So if that's the worst, and I went through a crowd of people, and they say, "Well, what do you think the worst is going to happen if you smoke pot?" And they'd say, "Oh, I'll get the munchies, or I'll go to sleep, or I'll play video games for too long, in 3 hours, or, and really, that's the worst? That's it? Like, that's why we're hated and hunted down like animals, 34 million people arrested over 3 generations. Really, is that possible? That's the worst that we can be, in a world where, when I was in Dublin the other night, I got up the next morning and there were like hundreds of liquor bottles and beer bottles and glasses that people walked out of restaurants with full of beer, and they were everywhere, right? And you could hear the carnage of the night before. As the night went on, people, yelling and screaming and doing crazy things. And you just know there's going to be some sexual assault, and you know there's going to be all sorts of unwanted pregnancies and people making bad judgments about sex and people like getting into fights and all that. And I thought, and that's just in one night, in one city. I can see more carnage about to come or is going on than all the carnage I've ever seen for cannabis for 35 years. And I thought, and alcohol is legal. It's cigarettes that kill people so clearly are legal. Cannabis doesn't kill anybody. When I got back from my time in prison in the United States, and I quickly got my tolerance back, and I made a boast in a public forum where I said, I smoked 15 joints in the last 3 hours, right? Which, if they're all the same strain, I could do. If they were all different, that might be a bit much. Right? But my point was, because somebody said, well, doesn't that mean you're addicted? I said, no, that wasn't my point. My point was you can't do 15 of anything without very ghastly repercussions. Imagine 15 beer in 2 or 3 hours. Imagine 15 shots. Imagine 15 cups of coffee in 2 or 3 hours. People, you'd see that. That person would be negatively. 15 Big Macs from McDonald's, you're going to be sick and obese. 15 cupcakes with all that sugar in it. It's going to send you crazy, give you pre-diabetes. 15 of anything, 15 aspirin, 15, you name it, 15 of almost anything is going to have some effect on you that's a negative way. And I just told him, I just smoked 15 joints a lot, and you don't even know it. You wouldn't even know it unless I told you, right? It's that sublime an effect, right? So I thought, so that's the worst it can be. We have all this incredible stuff to offer the world, and we continue to do so every day in medicine and utility and clothing. And Canadian grocery stores are filled with food, cereals and various things, hemp flour, hemp oils that come from hemp seeds, which we grow thousands of acres of in Canada now. That's something I actually helped finance too. And then some of the other things I helped finance in my district was Canada's first medical marijuana program. We won in court over that. That was financed by the money from seeds. That's Parker versus Regina, which is, we use the same term as you do here in England. And Hitzig versus Regina 2001, when we appealed the bad government behavior that brought in Canada's federal medical marijuana program. My seeds paid for that too. They paid for a lot of things, and you can find out all of this. A lot of these things are in movies I'm in. I'm in lots of movies. A fun one about my 2003 tour across Canada, where I smoked in front of all those police stations, is covered in a movie called Escape to Canada. It's a lot of fun. It's about the year that we had same-sex marriage brought in Canada, as well as half the movies devoted to my legalizing cannabis, which at the time looked like it was very close to happening. And where was I? Oh yes, okay, all the great things that cannabis does. And there's no negative downside. I mean, I can't really say. I've been smoking for 35 years. I've seen so many people. I can't say anyone's ever said it changed my life for the worse. If it didn't get along with them, they stopped smoking it. And usually people say, well, I did dumb things when I was a teenager on pot. And I said, well, what happened when you stopped smoking pot? Oh, it was all right. Right, so I mean, that's it? That's the worst? If you'd have done stupid things on alcohol, you could be dead. You could have killed someone else. You might have made a decision that you regret for the rest of your life on alcohol. Did you make any decisions you regret for the rest of your life on pot? And no one ever has a decision they made that affected the rest of their life in a negative way on pot. You don't do that. See, pot doesn't change the nature of your personality. It just makes you more perhaps introspective. It makes you more sensitive. It makes you more perceptive of things going on around you. But it doesn't change who you are as an individual. Very few people, I've never heard a person say, yes, I changed my fundamental belief system for the worse after smoking a joint. Never happened. Never happened. Now, if you tell people, did the fundamental nature of your character and personality change after you had 6 beer? Oh yeah. Everybody will admit that they know someone like that, or that may have happened to themselves, except we're usually too embarrassed to admit such a thing because we know the carnage and destruction and negativity that's possible under alcohol, or even psychiatric medicines that they give out. So cannabis is this wonderful thing. Has very little downside, has fabulous upsides, contributed more to modern humankind than anything else. Our culture has given more to the world. So then, what's with this pot prohibition? Because when you look at pot prohibition, what's the public benefit? Well, what did people get for that? I mean, after all, one of the big things about prohibition, it's cost you, probably in the UK, $1 trillion in the last 50 years. It's cost over $1 trillion in the United States. It's cost a fabulous amount in Canada. It's cost a lot of money than you paid for in your taxes. So what did you get for that? That's the kind. What do you get for all the $1 trillion? Because people are still, I would dare say there's more marijuana right now, and this is a good thing, in the UK than at any other time in the history of these countries. There's more pot being produced right now than ever before. And we have prohibition, right? We've had prohibition for 45 years. It's cost lots of money. They still arrest people trying to smuggle it in, trying to grow it, people growing it. But with still more pot than ever before. More people in the UK are smoking pot than ever before. And so clearly it's a failure. And it's cost $1 trillion, or probably close to £500 billion in that time. And then it's created a murderous series of cartels around the world. Pot prohibition then has become the playground of murderous, violent gangs. 60,000 people in Mexico alone have died in the last 10 years because of cartels killing people over the marijuana and cocaine trade that goes through Mexico. And Colombia has been destabilized thoroughly for the last 30 years with about 50,000 people killed and a lot of arable land poisoned by the U.S. Planned Colombia program that sprayed pesticides all over Colombia. And you've got many West African governments now currently dealing with Ebola to distract them, but there's a lot of organized criminal gangs that have essentially set up narco governments in those areas and operate freely and use violence and intimidation and corruption, bribery of governments and bribery of police forces to get that way. So we have this world, and police all over the world are being militarized. This is probably true in the UK. It's certainly true in Canada, where every police department seems to have heavily armed police officers, heavy military vehicles, all sorts of things to deal with what are now emerging as just routine matters, and they're militarizing all their equipment. We've had a massive police state since the drug war started 45 years ago, where they can spy on you, surveil you, put GPS on your car, follow your email, look at your phone calls, look at your metadata. And we all know that Canada, Britain, and the United States all cooperate in sharing information, and including information that relates to arrests for marijuana. This was found out in Edward Snowden's releases, where he found out that the Canadian government would spy on Americans, because the American NSA was forbidden, and the NSA would spy on Canadians, and then they'd just share the information so they didn't technically break the law of each other's countries. And that's what happens with the Five Eyes of Britain, Canada, United States, New Zealand, and Australia. And they share all this information. So the drug war has enabled this fabulous police state. It's got cartels and gangs all over North America and Europe. There are gangs probably in London, England, I suspect there must be. With 10 million people, you've probably got a lot of drugs handled by criminal organizations, as well as the wonderful people we love and hold dear who grow pot for us. But nonetheless, prohibition has given us gang violence. It's given us unsafe streets. What it does, too, to young people is incredibly corrupting. So imagine a typical group of young people, 15, 16, and 17, and they usually do go get jobs that pay the minimum wage, the lowest you could probably get in the marketplace, but it's their step up into the system, so they're working at these jobs. And then imagine, if you will, one day, one of their peers who used to be like them comes up and he's got brand new sneakers, he's got great clothes, he's got a girl on his arm, he's got a vehicle, and he's got a lot of cash. And you all know what he's doing, he's dealing drugs. And that is a scenario, because immediately what happens with all those other kids is they go, wow. We live in a material world. iPhones cost a lot of money, $600, $700, and everybody wants one. A smartphone. Clothes cost a lot of money, and young people want them more than everybody to keep up with the others. And sneakers cost money, vehicles cost money, drugs cost money. Even a girlfriend is a status symbol that always seems to accumulate over people who have drugs. So they see this, and it immediately corrupts everybody in that group, because they're no longer content with working at some minimum wage job. They're attracted by the idea of selling drugs and having that kind of material lifestyle. They're not thinking about the consequences that might happen years down the road if they get arrested or shot or stabbed or in a fight or in a conflict. They're thinking only of the immediate gain they can get now. And that's another thing that prohibition does. It corrupts all our young people. So you've got prohibition costing billions of dollars, potentially £500 billion. You've got organized gangs operating throughout the world and creating terrible carnage and havoc. You've got young people being corrupted into a life of potential crime. You've got people getting criminal records so they can't travel abroad or get bonded or become a university student in the United States or work in a bank in the UK. You've got all these negative things that prohibition does. It violates our civil rights. So many of our civil rights are violated because of the war on drugs. And here's the big thing again. There's not a good apparent policy that's come out of it. It's something that's all bad news. Pot prohibition gives us all bad things. Marijuana provides us with all good things and great inspiration. So why do we have universal marijuana prohibition around the world, except, say, in Colorado and Washington State, but really just Colorado, because Colorado, no one's going to jail for growing their own, and no one's going to jail for selling it or possessing it, and that's how you determine a successful legalization policy. If no one's going to jail any longer, and everyone has access to marijuana to either grow it or buy it at a reasonable price, then you have essentially acceptable legalization. And that pretty well only exists in Colorado right now. In the whole world, after 50 years of this failed policy, that's the only place that's actually changed that regime. That's pretty astonishing. Pretty astonishing that that program has never been questioned by the voting public. Because, again, they're spending, it's their money, not just our money and our livelihoods that are at stake, but everybody's money is going to this. Everybody suffers for unsafe streets. Everybody suffers when their children are lured into drug gangs. Everybody suffers when our civil liberties are violated because it creates more civil liberty violation. And all of us are victimized when the police get militarized to treat all of us as almost like terrorists. Coming through, I mean, that time they came through my house at 4 in the morning over me growing some plants, like, that's spectacular. That's amazing. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And that's what got me going. None of this makes sense except for the one thing, because I'm a very cynical person about government. I believe we should work with government. I'm very pragmatic about getting whatever freedom we can get for our people in whatever manner. But the reason I went and broke those laws and tried to create an infrastructure is because the only reason politicians have, elected officials have, for oppressing us is that it's as obvious as that. It's people control. Pot people are free thinkers. We question authority. Jodie alluded to that, or said it explicitly. We don't accept the dogmas of the church, and we don't accept dogmas of the government very readily. You know this because who are the people that hate pot, really? Parents, teachers, priests, policemen, and politicians. Those are the 5 groups. Pretty well done. And it all starts when you smoke pot. The reason your parents don't like it is because all of a sudden you're going, you're full of shit. You're just saying, you're saying it's true because you say it's true. You know, you start questioning your parents, and your parents hate that. I mean, they already have a tough life. The last thing they need you is becoming an ingrateful teenager and who's now questioning them on everything while you live at their place on their money. Right? They hate that. You're so ungrateful. Right? But you do. And then who's the next line that hates pot? Teachers. Because all of a sudden you're going, this is nonsense. None of this is true. There's nothing in this textbook about the history of the UK is true. It's like the government did this, then the government did that. The people aren't even in this textbook. It's like they did nothing. They were just victims of whatever the government came up with. That's the advances of civilization, right? So you start questioning your textbooks, and you question your teachers. And then you start going back and you question the religious dogmas you grew up with. You're questioning the policeman who's out to oppress you, and it's more obvious he's your enemy. Once you start smoking pot and you see the reaction, you become very acutely, okay, you're definitely the enemy now. Everything they told me about policemen is totally not true, right? And so Jodie says you start questioning everything. You lie, parents lie, teachers lie, politicians lie, the priests lie, and I forgot the other one, but they're lying too, right? And so that's when you find out why those are haters, because all of a sudden you're rebelling against the authority that is probably unearned. So that's it. It's just the only reason we have prohibition is to control the free thinkers. Now that's always been the job of government in its own way, because government's whole point is to control. They control everything. Like when Jodie pointed out that every single item in this room is regulated in some way, the clothes we make, some good regulations. I guess it shouldn't be flammable. I shouldn't burn up if I accidentally light this sweater on fire. But everything we do, from the barber that cut your beard or didn't, to the person who made your clothes, to the manufacturer of this bottle, which has to be recyclable, to these vapor pens, which probably have to be made in a certain way in order to be imported. Everything is regulated. So government's job is, in their own mind, to control people, control things. Kind of control as much as they can control. And they don't give it up very easily. In fact, it needs to be really taken from them by force, especially after 45 or 50 years. I don't mean violent force. I just mean we have to be determined as a culture to get our lives, our rights, and our mind back from the government that thinks they own it. And 45 years is a long time to wait. And my point in my presentation is that cannabis is a wonderful thing. There's nothing better on earth. Prohibition is a terrible thing that in every possible policy approach is a terrible thing for society, and that we have to finally address that. And that is going on in the UK right now. Again, there's more marijuana growing right now than ever before. There's more marijuana being smoked than ever before. And I think there's a great intellectual awareness going around the globe right now Thanks to Colorado, thanks to Uruguay, thanks to all the progress, even thanks to Spain, thanks hopefully to some degree to my efforts in Canada and in the United States, that people are realizing this is a failed policy, that the majority of people in Canada now want legalization, the majority of people in the United States want legalization, and in fact the majority of people in the United States and Canada both said in polls that they no longer consider marijuana use a vice or a sin or a crime or a moral failing. Because it's that kind of stigmatization that allows them to come up with a prohibition. Well, marijuana is a bad thing, or you marijuana people are bad people. Underlying a lot of people's objections to marijuana is that belief that you people are not good people. Now the evidence shows it's the complete opposite. We're the best people you would want around your children, to provide you with goods, to come up with good ideas, to come up with good music. Pot people are probably more trustworthy than the average person. We're better drivers than the average person. If you take all the pot people out there, and I will tell you this, I've always driven stoned or whatever it is you want to call it. I would smoke pot all day long and it wouldn't occur to me to worry about going into that car 5 minutes later and driving around.
Straight up.
You know, I've done that all my life, never had an accident, you know, driven for 30 years. I trust my own judgment because pot doesn't make you reckless like alcohol does. Alcohol, you go into a car, you think you're competent, and it's the arrogance of the alcohol that's actually created that because you are completely impaired. You're completely impaired, but you're arrogantly presuming, no, I can do this. I've done this before. But with pot, if you don't even think you're competent to drive, you won't even get in that car. No, wait, I'm not going there. Right? You're just a little too paranoid. People say, I'm paranoid when I drive. And I said, that's a good thing. You're going the speed limit for sure. Everybody who's high on pot when they drive goes the speed limit, right? The exception is if you put the right Led Zeppelin tape in. Okay, you're there twice as quick. But most of the time, no, that's a bit of joking. I would never do that. But you're a better driver, Stone. I've always felt that. And I think you're a better parent when you're high because you're more into what the kids are doing. And sometimes it's hard to really get into that mind space when you're thinking about a lot of things like bills and problems and things going on at work, and your kids want to jump on you like mine did when I get home and play and do stuff, and I've got to be fixed. So I would have a joint before I go in. And then that way, whatever they want to do, I was good for. I was totally into the program, right? I can't think of any negative thing about pot. I can only think of wonderful things about pot, and then we need to spread this message. We need to educate people, talk to them at their level. We don't need arguments to convince people. We just need conversations. And they will come around. Because right now, when I first started in 1990, there was no media discussion about marijuana of any kind. And now there's a discussion going on every day. All around the world, somebody somewhere is talking about pot in the media, in national media, on CNN, in newspapers. And that wave of intellectual thought is coming to the UK or is already in the UK. And it's already affecting people. So you have a better opportunity now than ever before to organize, do stuff, get stuff done. And I think we can see legalization in the UK in the next 5 to 7 years. It's going to start happening. In Canada, we have a very unusual election next year where the regularly governing party, the Liberal Party of Canada, who's governed Canada for most of our existence, actually now is the third party after a bad election last time. And their new leader, Justin Trudeau, who's the son of a former prime minister who's somewhat beloved in Canada, he has promised full legalization if he forms the government next year. And not only has he promised full legalization, but he's promised to expunge the criminal records of everybody who has a marijuana-related offense. And that would include a stack of mine, right? So I potentially am being self-interested here in that I would benefit probably more than anybody else by that law. But although that hasn't inhibited me from traveling, I'm barred for life from the United States, and there's nothing any Canadian government can do there. So, and it's unfortunate because I would love to meet the people of the United States, because when I was in prison, I got about 7,500 letters, and 6,500 of them were from Americans. And some Americans, this one fellow, and I don't even include him in the total, sent me a letter every day for 4.5 years, and not just a letter telling me what was going on in his community, but he went to the library and photocopied magazine articles and cartoons and stuff. So every day I'd get a packet of 5 or 6 pages with stories and all sorts of stuff every day for 4.5 years. It cost him, he's on disability, 61-year-old guy, and kind of just, you know, and yet he still spent $1,000 on postage in that time. The photocopy cost for him, even at a nickel each, probably came to $2,000 in that time. I have no idea how he afforded it, but he would write, and I'd only write him back once every couple of months, right? And because I was trying to keep up with all the other people who, you know, would expect a letter back. And so he kind of, because he was sending me one every day, I figured once every 2 months was fine, and it was. But I had that kind of support from Americans, and that fellow had never met me before. He just said, oh, your story affected me, and I'm going to write you every day. He told me from the outset until the day you're out. And he kept that promise and wrote me every day for 4.5 years, right? So I would love to travel to the United States, and I'm hoping one day Jodie gets elected to Parliament in Canada, and while they're doing bilateral negotiations with the United States about things, that they'll let me come over on some kind of diplomatic passport and I can speak to people on a limited basis. I'm holding out hope one day. But even if I don't go to the United States, that doesn't matter. I never regretted a moment of being in jail. I've been to jail. By the way, I went to jail for 3 months for passing a joint once in Saskatchewan. After I lectured at a university, we went out afterwards, and 40 of us were smoking pot. And then the pot, we finished. And then a cop came by, and all I could do was smell the remnants, and he just turned around and asked somebody, "What are you doing here?" That person said, "I'm smoking a joint with Mr. Emery." And the cop says, "Did he pass you a joint?" And the person said, "Yes." Cop arrested me, put me in handcuffs, kept me in jail for 7 days until I made bail, and I got sentenced to 3 months in jail for that, right? And so that's one of the many things I've gone to jail for too. All crazy, outrageous stuff. I'm going to end my talk by showing you though how progress is possible, and then I can take questions. That place I was arrested and put in jail for 3 months is Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. It's in the middle of nowhere. One of the reasons that was a difficult time for me in jail is because it was like 1,000 miles, like 1,000 kilometers approximately from my home of Vancouver. And so I was quite far away, and I felt kind of isolated and somewhat alone in that environment. Plus, though the experience turns out to be really good, but here's the thing. That was in 2004. August to October, I went to jail. In the last 2 years, Pot TV has covered the Saskatchewan Cannabis Harvest Cup that just concluded. If you watch Pot TV, you'll see that it ended last week. 26 different strains, 200 people showing up for 2 days straight, smoking pot nonstop in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, same place I went to jail 3 months for one joint. Now has this massive cannabis event where hundreds of people attend. They smoke, it's broadcast live in real time, so if the police actually cared, they could try and track it down and bust them all. Nothing's happened over the last 3 years this has gone on. So you see that fabulous progress can be made from getting 3 months for passing a joint to hundreds of people smoking over a 48-hour period without being molested by police or anything at all, and having it broadcast live around the world for people to watch and observe. So rapid progress is possible, and it's even happening in Saskatchewan, Canada, of all places. So that would be my message to you. A lot of things happen quickly, and it's up to us to be ready to be active, be informed, be ready to talk to politicians. Because soon, if Canada legalizes next year, every government in the world is going to be interested. Because once one government does it, just like Colorado having done it, every legislator from all the other United States, the 48 states, are going and visiting Colorado, finding out that crime has gone down, there is less drunk driving, there's less alcohol offenses. They suspect that alcohol use might be dropping, and I suspect it definitely will be dropping. One of the reasons we need to legalize marijuana is so we can advertise it. We need to advertise it to get people off alcohol. We need to advertise it to get people away from cigarettes. We need to advertise marijuana to get people from prescription drugs. Because we have a better product. We have a track record that can prove all the things we say, that it's great for your health, it's going to help you with a lot of ailments, it's going to make you a creative, happy person, it's going to take away stress, it's only going to be good things for you. And hopefully one day, my vision is that it's all legal, no one goes to jail, no one gets punished, we don't have any more stigma, and that marijuana is probably 20 pounds an ounce. That's what it should be. Yeah. It should be very cheap. Marijuana, I've grown tomatoes, I've grown marijuana, I've grown cucumbers, and it's as easy to grow as tomatoes. And tomatoes are very, very cheap. Typically when we grow a lot of tomatoes, we give away most of them to our neighbors. And that's how I see it too. I'm a capitalist. I believe in money, and whatever the market will bear is what we're going to have to pay. But in my ideal world where we're all legally allowed to grow pot and trade pot and share pot, that's what we do. We harvest a lot of our own strain, we pack it up in jars and cure it, and then we trade it with our friends. And so for the winter we've got 15 jars, 15 different strains, all mason jars, and we can choose that, and that's how we choose to enjoy our culture, where money isn't a factor like it is today. Money is so important in our culture, and for now that's okay. But that's not freedom. We shouldn't be spending 3,500 pounds a year. If you smoke just 1 ounce of marijuana in the UK, you're spending 3,500 pounds a year. That's 5,000 Canadian dollars. Actually, it's even more. It's 5,300 Canadian dollars. We could be spending that on our children's health, our education, going to college, buying clothing for ourselves, buying a car, I mean, down payment on a car, paying for the car. That would cover a good chunk of some people's rent, $5,000. And that's the price of prohibition too, is we're paying far too much for marijuana because other people who don't understand us have got us criminalized to the degree that that's what it costs. It costs less in Canada, but it's still a shocking amount of money when you consider what it should be. So that'll conclude my presentation. I hope you've seen some of the stuff I've done in my life, and there are a lot of fun stuff and interesting stuff. And like I say, I've gone to jail for lots of different things within the cannabis culture, crazy stuff really. And it's covered in a lot of movies like Prince of Pot or Principle of Pot or Escape to Canada, or The Union has a good little segment on me and stuff like that. So thank you very much for coming and inviting me. And I had a lovely time, by the way, in London today. We walked around the Parliament buildings and Buckingham Palace, and it was awesome because actually my parents are from not far from here. Both my parents were from Birmingham, England, and they came to Canada in the great emigration that came from Britain in the 1940s and 50s in 1951. And I've actually never been back here. And so for me, this is a wonderful kind of homecoming to come to the place where my parents are from. And by the way, they moved to Canada in a kind of a noble way. My father, he said, I didn't want you to be brought up in a class-oriented society. He said, and I was tired of being a working class boy and being referred to as working class and having those doors closed in my face. That was the case back in 1951. I don't know, may still be the case. But in any case, he said, so I wanted to move to Australia or Canada so I could bring you up where you wouldn't be thought of and labeled. And I'm so very grateful to my father for that, because I had a store when I was 16 years old, and a business when I was 11, and I was very business-minded. No one else in our family really was or is, but I was. And I remember when our relatives from England came to visit me, and they saw my store when I was 17 years old, and they said, well, you'd never be allowed to do this in England. And I said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, they just never let a working-class boy have his own shop. It just wouldn't happen. And I said, well, how would they make it happen? And they said, they literally wouldn't rent you the property. They wouldn't let your father go sign or do anything. That just wouldn't happen. And I just looked at him and I realized that he had limitations on how he was able to think about his own future, his own progress. And then after that, I was very grateful for my father from emigrating from England. So I hope that's improved too, right? I hope that has changed in England, because that was his biggest concern, is growing up in a classless society where we're all judged for who we are. And right now we're part of the cannabis class, and in a way we get treated negatively because of it, and we've got to change that too. So lots of challenges remain throughout our lives in both Canada and the UK, and thanks for coming, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer. Really, no questions?
Okay, questions. Anyone?
Well,
At the front row.
I've got a couple of tidbits. They're not questions, but I thought of them while you were speaking and while Jodie was speaking, and thought they might be useful in future. One is in terms of how illegal it was. There was actually once upon a time a bill forcing some people in this country to grow more hemp, because that's how we went and empirised the world with our great sails and ropes. The other one is with regards to hempcrete fixing CO2. Do you know that concrete is actually working backwards, and it was only discovered a few years ago, and surprisingly nobody's in the public's found out about it yet, but concrete fixes oxygen. So if you could actually come up with campaigns and programs to propose the replacement of concrete. I don't really know much about the material properties of hempcrete. I don't know if it would be useful for making a car park out of it, but
we can make anything out of it. We just saw a hemp house in Ireland, a beautiful job, and he was using hempcrete, all sorts of different things, and he'd made it himself, extensions and additions onto his home. There's an excellent book produced by an Irishman called Hemp Housing, and I just met him, Steve Aline, over in Ireland, and he's just got back from Washington, D.C. and Colorado talking to people there who want to use all the hemp byproducts, because they're producing so much marijuana, but they're not using the hemp stalks for anything. So now there's a project underway to collect them all together and make hemp housing out of them. So these are all things that are going to proceed from legalization, because the price of cannabis is going to need to come down to make that practical, because hemp is still a labor-intensive endeavor right now to process that into housing. But it's true that hempcrete and hemp housing fixes carbon dioxide, so it's carbon dioxide positive. It actually takes more CO2 out of the environment than it releases, right? Which actually growing cannabis does, but when we light it up, it releases it back. So that's it. But hemp housing is an amazing thing, and I've seen 3 or 4 of them now, and it's really an impressive thing. Yeah. And same with hemp for seeds and seed oil, because like I say, Canadian grocery stores are filled with food products made from hemp seeds, Now we've had that going for 20 years, and you'll see a whole industry develop in the UK using hemp seed oil, hemp seeds, and what have you as well. Yes, you had a question.
Yeah, you were just mentioning that next year you could have some pretty interesting elections in Canada.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the guy's name, but if he gets in, has he talked about what sort of model he would roll out? Has he given details around that as yet?
Well, here's the thing about a federal government legalizing marijuana. There's really only one way to do it, and that's take marijuana out of the schedule of controlled drugs and substances. So if with a stroke of a pen, if you just cross cannabis out, it becomes legal federally. But in Canada, all the provinces, I'm not sure how that would work in the UK or what your equivalent to a province is, maybe a county, but the provinces would then be permitted to legalize it, like zoning stores, probably issuing licenses. They wouldn't be allowed to criminalize anybody, but they could regulate it, and they probably would regulate it because it's a source of revenue. Taxes, yeah, so they'd come up with a tax regime, they might come up with a licensing regime, and they might allow local councils to determine where those shops could be. Or they might even do a model that, like Washington State, where the liquor board is authorizing and that bureaucracy is working, issuing licenses and supervising how it's all grown and distributed and labeled. And I'm sure we're going to see all that kind of, but it would be at the provincial level. And I'm sure that's really his only option.
And then on the people in his party at the province level, are they singing for the same songbook? Are they all aligned?
No, they'll all be different, and the federal Liberal Party doesn't really have a provincial equivalent. They're not quite related between provincial and federal parties, even if they have the same name. Okay. So, although there are Liberal Party governments throughout Canada at the provincial level, it'll be respected. Because, especially in a place like British Columbia, over 70% of the population want to legalize entirely in British Columbia, so they'll expect a fairly liberal model of good access with regular constraints on the trade, nothing outlandish. What I would object to is any kind of punitive taxation, because we've been punished all for the last 50 years as prohibition has been punishing us. We've been stigmatized and demonized and yelled. And really, in reality, they owe us a big apology and a massive refund, right? Which is what we're entitled to. But what I don't want is this, what they have in Washington State, where they have 25% taxation at every level of distribution. It's making it very expensive at the retail level. And why should we pay 25%? Like, I don't get it. Like, that's a punishment. You know, like the regular consumer is paying just a normal, you'd call it VAT here. So if cannabis has that regular tax applied to it, fair enough. But a punitive tax, like to punish us for who we are, 25 or something outrageous like that, that's unacceptable. Mm-hmm. And what they're going to find in Washington is because it's already legal to possess it, and they've got a regime to sell it, and the federal government only arrests people with more than 100 plants or 100 pounds, so everything in between is kind of state. So if you tax it too high, people will simply avoid the taxes and begin breezing on the black market again. And I think Washington will find that out. Colorado was much smarter. They had a much lower tax. They're seeing a very vigorous tax collection. They're reaping a ton of revenue in Colorado. And like I say, crime is down, alcoholism is down, alcohol-related offenses are down, and it's directly attributable to the amount of marijuana they're selling. So these are some great things coming out that are going to inspire people around the world to advocate in their jurisdiction. Yes?
I just want to say two things. We've actually, in terms of the Cannabis Social Clubs, we've liaised with a couple of the police authorities. We've got police crime commissioners now, which sort of like basically decide where the money's going to be spent. And we've sort of approached them and said, you know, prohibition is very pointless and a lot of waste of your resources. In the northeast, like areas like Durham, they've come out and supported changing to a different model of than prohibition, and they accept that 9 plants would be a personal use. They're fed up with the level of and the amount of Asian gangs that have moved into the area charging £400 an ounce. It's very bad. So they support the idea of doing it on a low profit model or no profit model on a small collective grows, and they're actually willing to have a policy where they communicate with sort of like a growers board or a UCC hub just to bring the price down.
I think the Cannabis Social Clubs that you have in the UK are a terrific idea, and that's an idea that should definitely be expanded. I do notice your T-shirt about 420. I want to take credit for that, because we started the first April 20th event back in 1995, and now we do get 25,000 people coming into the main plaza of the city, smoking for about 18 hours in a row straight. And last year, under Jodie's organization leadership, because she's looked after it in the 5 years I was away, we had 80 booths that were paid for where people sold marijuana, and another 100 booths that people didn't pay for to sell marijuana. So it was probably at one point the largest marijuana retail market in the history of modern civilization, to have 200 booths all selling marijuana. I have never heard of anything on that scale before. So, you know, it's funny, we went from 200 people in a park in 1995, not even sure if we would get arrested, and now we've got the entire downtown plaza for blocks taken up with people smoking pot for 18 hours a day. And we coordinate with the city. The police, they call us up, they say, can you do this, this, and this? Can you have this many toilets? Can you have this many security guys? Can you keep this safe? Because we're going to end up blocking all the traffic off for blocks around. And we work with them. So they're actually helping us keep the public order while 200 booths are selling marijuana all day long to anybody and everybody, and people are smoking pot outdoors and having a great time. And over again, the proof is what happens. Nobody gets intoxicated. We have to provide ambulance services on site. We have an ambulance right there. We have St. John's ambulance people, volunteers, and people we paid who are experts at being medics, and nothing ever happens that's related to cannabis.
They get all year.
What's that?
I bet it's the best job they get all year.
It is. It's the quietest. Nobody gets hurt, and there's no harm. And only time we've ever had to send someone to the hospital is if they had alcohol and they tripped, or one person was drinking, was drunk, fell over, and hit his head. But otherwise, the cannabis people, 25,000. Can you imagine if you had 25,000 people drinking alcohol all day, which is legal, right? 25,000 people drinking alcohol over an 18-hour period, right? Would the St. John's ambulance people have nothing to do all day? It's such an obvious thing, but I want you to not get cynical about how obvious it is and how long we've waited, but in fact get ready to seize this wave that's coming around the world, that's happening right now, and that people are talking about legalizing marijuana in a way that's never been happened before. I mean, there were a few little, blips in the 70s, in that period where some studies were coming out saying we should decriminalize marijuana. And then it went dark in the 80s everywhere after Reagan came out. It went dark in the UK, Canada, and the United States. And now we're seeing a real whirlwind of intellectual activity, famous politicians coming up, business people. Money is going into marijuana. I know it's going on in the UK. There are more grow shops opening up all the time. There are seed companies all the time. By the way, get those seed companies to help you out. They're all making a lot of money. I ought to know. I gave $5 million of our profits away in a 10-year period, and these seeds are very lucrative. So I'm not saying they should feel obligated, but they should
Can we
feel,
say Marc Emery said you need to give us some
that's
money?
right. They should feel obligated to be
Stop giving us free
primary,
things.
and to a lesser degree, the grow shops, they don't make quite as much money, but the seed people make good money. That's why there seems to be hundreds of these companies in that business, and they're all growing out of Spain, right? So that's where all these seeds are coming from, and Spain is a terrific model to look at. Somewhat unique in their own circumstances, but there's good things going on in Austria right now. There's good things going on in other parts of Europe. Belgium has got good things. Amsterdam isn't as good as it once was, but it's still a decent
place. Kind of a social club model as well now.
And the thing is, that's what happens when you have it too good for a while. You get careless and sloppy. The Dutch had it so good for so long they never thought they needed to do any activism. Then the government starts taking away all these things they've taken for granted, and they're helpless. They don't know what to do. Right? Canadians are in the sense the opposite. It's all illegal. It's always been illegal. We've always gone to jail. And to this day, people are opening right now lounges and clubs to sell marijuana in the strangest places in Canada. To me, taking a big risk. But they're all willing to go to jail.
So
they're all willing. They've accepted. If I go to jail, I go to jail.
On that point, that was what my following question was going to be. Like, you've obviously been quite brave. You put yourself out there and stuck your head above the line. What advice do you give to other people that might be a little bit sort of fearful or scared of being arrested for the first time? They've never broken.
Okay.
I've never broken any other law. Well, probably. Than my cannabis use and my activism. But obviously. I feel like I'm essentially from a
we
privileged
may not
world.
necessarily be in the period where you need to overtly break the law. You're already breaking the law to some degree because you're all producing marijuana and the law doesn't allow that. So, and we're all consuming it. So we break the law all the time. What you're saying, though, is you don't expect to get caught doing those routine behaviors of either growing, cultivating, smoking, selling, trading, passing a joint. It's all trafficking. It's all illegal, right? But, the biggest problem is we've gone to jail for 50 years as victims and not as warriors. By determining, civil disobedience allowed me to do this. It allowed me to choose the time and place. It allowed me to issue a notice telling everybody what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, right? And then it put the onus on the police. You either can arrest me, which is what I expect and look forward to, or you could not arrest me, which will cause interesting speculation since I'm so overtly breaking the law, that there must be some reason why you're not arresting me, is that you don't consider it a legitimate law, right? And so you put it on them. So it's better to go to jail as a warrior, and you have the terrain and the turf. You go to jail on your terms and your time, and you can certainly control half of the battlefield because the media is paying attention, right? So one of the things I would do is you would select an appropriate target, maybe the Parliament, but the Parliament's a bit on the large scale. And I would say the most overt thing to do is not smoke pot, because you can actually do that safely almost any large city in Europe or North America, and if you have the numbers. But I would say carry a big 6-foot tall plant that's rich in leaves and buds and sit there in some provocative place, and then have 10 people surround you with really great signs, like ones that say politicians that support prohibition, support organized crime. Irrefutable, damning posters that clearly outline that you're not just about legalizing pot, but you're about their threats to this public safety. You're about threats to our young people, joining gangs and lured into the drug trade. You're concerned about your civil liberties. You're concerned about the police state and the tremendous powers the police are given in the UK and Canada to enforce the drug laws. And that plant is a big symbol. And then you can have pro-hemp things, hemp housing for jobs and in the environment, and hemp medicines. And you can have some people there in wheelchairs, so that if the media comes by, or if they should come by, then they've got these people to interview who are all respectable, responsible people who, in fact, even have something to lose by coming out in public and holding a big plant. So even if you don't get arrested, you might get some attention. It could be covered any number of ways in social media, on YouTube. You can't calculate who's going to be inspired and influenced by what you do. That was something I always comforted myself when I was in jail. In fact, every day when I went across Canada smoking out those police stations, I would throw up around noon hour that day before I walked outside to go and do it. Because even though I was willing to go to jail, and I've never felt bad about going to jail, the thought really did terrify me every single time, right? What you expect beforehand is so unnerving that sometimes it's a relief when it does happen and it's not as bad as you think it is. Or it's as bad, but you know it's not going to last forever, right? So I was scared. I would throw up every one of those 18 cities around noon hour, and then I'd try and pull myself together, feel better, go outside, and never knowing if I was going to get arrested. We'd start smoke. I'd give a speech for an hour, and then I'd smoke at 4:20, and if I got arrested, I got hauled away. And then if I didn't get arrested, we'd had a big party for a couple hours, and we'd all smoke pot, and hundreds of us would so the influence is either the police would get jeered when I got hauled away, and then there would be a court case and publicity, or they didn't have the nerve to arrest me, and everybody celebrated, had a big party, and we demonstrated that the law was a paper tiger as well, for 2 hours in front of a police station smoking pot and appearing to party, and that's about as brazen, in-your-face, arrogant as you could possibly get. So, but I was scared, but I still did it, right? Because, I'm thinking down the road, and I'm the superhero in my own movie. So yeah, my dad always said it's normal to be scared. That's when you know you're courageous and brave. Because if you're scared and you still do it, you're putting something more important above your fear. And that's how we should be living it, when I say as warriors rather than as victims.
Right.
Yes?
You said you were jailed in 2005.
Well, that was the big one. That's when the U.S. had me arrested with the Canadian government. So I was in jail for a week, 10 days there, then got out on bail. Went to 4 different jails and then finally got out on bail, and then they took me away for 5 years in 2010 related to that arrest.
So during that 5 years, I was wondering if you really got anything out of it, whether you were strategizing, reading up on more stuff, or what was the most you got out of that time?
Well, we just kept doing what we were doing. Jodie and I edited Cannabis Culture magazine in that 5 year. We were speaking extensively. The 420 celebrations were getting bigger. Cannabis Day, which is a July 1st celebration we hold, which is also huge now, was getting larger. We continued to expand our business. We opened, almost as a bit of a time, when they took away my seed business because the bail conditions in 2005 forbid me to sell seeds. So we had to come up with something new and revolutionary, and so we came up with this idea of a lounge. And at first it was just one chair in a corner with a volcano, and it was like if you wanted to find out how a volcano worked, we put one there and you could just sit there and try it out. And then somebody said, well, can I just sit here and use it for a little while? And I said, okay, well, give us $2. And they said, okay, that's a good deal. So I thought, okay, he's willing to pay $2. So the next day we added a few more chairs and made it $5 for an hour, right? And that was basically it, just providing play. But it was a nice place. So within months, we had a huge area where people were willing to pay us $5 to come and sit and have a volcano, because they're expensive, to vaporize marijuana. And then we provide them with bongs, and we let people smoke and just and then we rented out for parties, and we started getting really big. And so now, for 8 years, we've been having this lounge where people are free to consume marijuana for 12, 14 hours a day, and we handle 400 people a day come into our club and give us $5, and even that's a fair bit of revenue. We don't even sell the marijuana. There are lots of places they can get marijuana, but there's very few places you can even consume it. And in fact, I'll give you an example of why the term legalization isn't necessarily that important. Because in Vancouver, we have over 50 clubs selling marijuana. And they often have 10 strains, and they go from $5 a gram to $10 a gram, or $200 an ounce, which is like 130 pounds. And they've exploded in the last 3 or 4 years, and they're not legal, but they are tolerated and permitted, just like our lounge is permitted and tolerated. So you can't do that in Colorado. They actually enforce laws that forbid people from having lounges like we do, where you can smoke marijuana. So here you have a legal environment in Colorado where everything's legal except what we're doing right now in Vancouver, which is tolerated, and you're not allowed to do that in Washington and Colorado. So there's lots of things we do in Vancouver that are illegal according to the letter of the law, but are what we have pushed, forced, and now, again, we had lots of riots and raids in the 1990s and various times. So over time, the police adjust to the changing social mores, just like they're adjusting to your clubs. They're cooperating with you. They realize that this is the inevitable wave of the future that's coming, and there's only so much point in them using taxpayers' money to aggravate you and to create a social dilemma which they don't really want, because they have a million things to do. So all things being equal, if they can work with decent, responsible people, like they do with Jodie at 420, and help organize 25,000 people smoking pot all day and 200 people selling weed, then they'd like to see that done in an orderly, reasonable manner that causes no social problems. So again, legalization is almost a term too. You have to create your own reality. And I believe somebody famous probably even said that. Yeah, be the change you wish to be, or something like that. And worth employing. You know. Anyway, thanks very much. I think it's time for us to go. Because are you ready to go?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much, everyone.
Go out under any circumstances. If any zombies happen to get into your house,